C-126 I'm dead. Boom. 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 A relentless barrage of attacks shattered the ground, leaving it cracked and caving in. Energy surged wildly in all directions. After what felt like an eternity, the team finally stopped. The squad members were drenched in sweat, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Captain, no movement," one of them said, his voice uncertain. Jessica's sharp eyes scanned the scene. The street was a mess of craters, and as for the so-called Ethan, not even a trace of ash remained. "Looks like we got him. Let's go check it out," she said, motioning for the team to move. One by one, they leapt down from the rooftop. They spread out, searching the area. Nothing. Not even the faintest hint of life. "That's it. It's over," one of the team members scoffed, clearly unimpressed. He'd been bracing for something far worse, but now it seemed like they'd overestimated the so-called zombie king. The fact that none of them had even been attacked was proof enough. Jessica nodded. "Yeah, it's done. But, Captain, where's the crystal core?" a female team member asked, frowning. Jessica's gaze swept the area again. She didn't see it either. Maybe it got blown to bits. Or launched somewhere in the blast. Just then, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows in the distance. The commotion they'd caused had drawn a horde of zombies, and they were now converging on the area. "Forget it. Let's get out of here and report back to Nathan. Let him figure it out," Jessica said, a smug smile tugging at her lips. Nathan hadn't believed her before. This was her chance to prove him wrong. The team wasn't worried about the low-level zombies, they were no real threat. But there was no point in sticking around and making things harder for themselves. They'd completed their mission. The zombie king was dead. Time to leave. The next morning, the sun rose slowly, casting its warm light over the city. At Genesis Biotech, the atmosphere was unusually lively. Nathan had just stepped into his office when he noticed a crowd of people inside. It was a gathering of the company's top brass, and among them were Jessica and her squad. They were lounging on the sofas, some with their legs crossed, looking smug as hell. "Mr. Nathan," Jessica began, her tone dripping with satisfaction, "our mission last night was a success. We took down the zombie king." "Wait, what?" Nathan froze, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Captain Reed, are you sleep deprived? Or maybe you're still dreaming? What kind of nonsense are you spouting?" Jessica smirked. "Oh, it's not nonsense. We've got the whole thing recorded. If you don't believe me, you can see for yourself." "Impossible. Absolutely impossible," Nathan shot back, shaking his head. "Where's the footage? Show me." "No problem." Jessica had been waiting for this moment. She pulled out a remote and pressed a button. The projector in the room flickered to life, and the recording began to play. Everyone in the room, including Nathan and the other executives, turned their attention to the screen. The footage was crystal clear. In the dim light of the street, a tall figure emerged from the distance. His face was strikingly handsome, and he wore a pristine white shirt, the signature look of the zombie king. "You actually ran into him," Nathan muttered, his expression shifting to one of shock. But what came next left him utterly stunned. In the video, a massive fireball hurtled toward the figure, signaling the start of the battle. What followed was an all-out assault. Explosions, energy blasts, and chaos that shook the very ground. The energy waves were so intense that even the recording equipment trembled slightly. Despite the shaky footage, it was clear as day. By the end of the fight, Ethan had been obliterated. Not even a speck of him remained. The team had even gone down to confirm it. This, Nathan was at a loss for words. He stared at the screen, his mind reeling. The zombie king, the one who'd been such a massive headache for him, was gone. Just like that, Jessica's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "So, Mr. Nathan, got anything else to say? This is great news." Nathan finally snapped out of it, his face lighting up with joy. The zombie king was dead, and with him, a major threat had been eliminated. He no longer had to live under that shadow. And better yet, without the zombie king, his minions would be easy pickings. Those crystal cores were invaluable, and with them, Nathan could solidify his control over Los Angeles. It was only a matter of time. "Captain Reed, you and your team are incredible. Taking down the zombie king in one go. That's just so badass," one of the executives exclaimed, practically glowing with admiration. "HMPH, no need to flatter me. It was nothing, really," Jessica replied, though the smug look on her face betrayed how much she was enjoying the praise. She tilted her head slightly, her tone playful as she added, "But, I have to admit, I kind of liked your rebellious attitude from before." Nathan. Meanwhile, Ethan was lounging comfortably in his pristine home, sipping on a drink while absorbing the energy from a crystal core. Life was good, peaceful, even. That peace was interrupted when his phone, resting on the coffee table, buzzed with a new message. Picking it up, Ethan saw it was from Mia. The message was short and to the point. "Dead. Huh." Ethan frowned, confused. What was this about? Was she cursing him out of nowhere? Had her mental breakdown flared up again? He typed back a quick reply. "Nope. Why are you asking?" Mia's response came almost immediately. "Oh, then never mind. Just check the Genesis Biotech website." And with that, she went radio silent. Ethan's confusion only deepened. What could possibly be on Genesis Biotech's website? He'd checked it just last night, and there hadn't been anything noteworthy. Still, curiosity got the better of him, and he opened the site on his phone. What he saw made him freeze. For a solid 3 seconds, he just stared at the screen, utterly dumbfounded. The homepage was buzzing with activity, dominated by a bold, bright red announcement. Breaking news. Last night, our company's Awakeners successfully hunted and killed the Zombie King in the Tower District. As previously stated, Genesis Biotech vowed to track him down and eliminate him, and we've delivered on that promise. Quote ? Ethan blinked, his mind racing. Wait. I'm dead. Since when? How come I didn't get the memo? It was obvious what Genesis Biotech was doing. This announcement wasn't just about the Zombie King. It was a PR move, a way to restore their reputation and reclaim the face they'd lost in the past. Beneath the announcement, the comments section was blowing up, with more activity than any of their previous posts. Holy crap. Isn't the Tower District a 5-star zombie nest? Yeah, I heard the Zombie King there was insanely powerful and freaky. That place was basically a no-go zone for humans. Oh my god, they actually managed to kill him. Genesis Biotech is amazing. This is great news. Now we can scavenge for supplies in that area. Quote. To add credibility to their claim, Genesis Biotech had even uploaded a high-definition recording of the fight. The footage showed the Awakeners unleashing a relentless barrage of attacks on Ethan, reducing him to nothing. And, of course, as everyone knows, videos don't lie. The survivors who watched the video were convinced. The comments were filled with awe and excitement, and Genesis Biotech's reputation was skyrocketing. Ethan stared at the video, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he was lost in thought. Then, slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. Ah, so that's what happened. It must have been those mimic fungi from the mountains. They'd taken on his appearance, gotten themselves obliterated by Genesis Biotech, and now the company had mistaken the fungi for him. Honestly, this wasn't a bad outcome. With this announcement, humans would undoubtedly start making moves. Survivors, Black Hand Legion members, and all sorts of other monsters would flock to the Tower District, thinking it was safe now. And when they did, they'd be bringing him a steady supply of little fruits to harvest. Yeah, let's just go with that. I'm dead, Ethan muttered to himself, a sly smile tugging at his lips. Stay updated through my virtual library empire. C-127 dinner. Ethan set his phone down, leaned back into the couch, and closed his eyes, trying to relax. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over the same question: who's going to make the first move? The morning passed uneventfully. Aside from the situation gaining traction online, everything was proceeding as expected. Until noon. At the edge of Ethan's territory, a faint commotion began to stir. A group of zombies was gathering, led by a towering zombie king. This one was clearly a brute, built for strength, almost like a walking tank, not unlike Bulldozer. This particular zombie king didn't have much of a following. He'd been a drifter, constantly on the move, picking fights wherever he could. Hey, as long as you're not dead, there's always a chance to rise to the top. And now's the time. Time to carve out my own turf. The zombie king grinned wickedly, striding forward with purpose. The group of underlings trailing behind him seemed just as fired up. Moments later, they reached the edge of Ethan's territory. But standing in the middle of the street ahead of them was a slim figure, her head tilted slightly, a pair of fierce, predatory eyes sizing them up. It was Laura, stationed there to guard the area. Who's this oversized idiot? Just looking at him pisses me off, she muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. The hulking zombie king stopped in his tracks, not attacking right away. His gaze locked onto Laura. He'd heard of her before. Her reputation for brutality was well known. Queen Laura, he began, his voice deep and gravelly, how about we work together? I'll help you take out the other zombie kings and build a new hive. Huh, who do you think you're taking out? Laura asked, her expression blank but her tone laced with irritation. Obviously Bulldozer and Shadow, the zombie king replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Oh, that's not a bad idea, Laura said, nodding slightly. The thought of taking down Bulldozer had crossed her mind more than once. She'd always been curious about what was inside that thick skull of his. But building a new hive? Yeah, no. Betraying Ethan wasn't even on the table. So, I think I'll just take you out instead, she declared. And with that, her figure blurred as she launched herself straight at the towering zombie king. Huh, the zombie king's brows furrowed. So the rumors were true. Laura was as vicious as they said. Well, if that's how it's gonna be, then it's a fight to the death. Let's go, he roared, turning to his followers. Attack. Rog. The zombies behind him erupted into a frenzy, charging forward with wild abandon. The street instantly descended into chaos. But it didn't stop there. From the alleys and side streets, more zombies began to pour in, Ethan's elite forces, ready to defend their turf. The two groups clashed violently, tearing into each other with savage ferocity. Amid the chaos, Laura darted around the zombie king, her claws slashing in a blur. 10 deep gashes appeared across his chest, dark, foul-smelling blood oozing out. The zombie king howled in pain, swinging a massive fist toward her. But Laura was too fast, sidestepping effortlessly before vanishing from his sight again. Swish, swish, swish. Laura's speed was overwhelming. She circled him relentlessly, her claws raking across his body again and again. Blood sprayed everywhere, and it wasn't long before the once imposing zombie king looked like he'd been shredded into ribbons. The towering brute roared in frustration, but there was nothing he could do. Laura leapt into the air, her razor-sharp claws aimed directly at his skull. Let's see what's inside that thick head of yours, she muttered with a wicked grin. ... This wasn't an isolated incident. Around the edges of Ethan's territory, other small zombie factions were also making moves, hoping to snatch a piece of the pie. But they didn't get far. Ethan's other zombie kings quickly crushed these opportunists, wiping them out before they could become a real threat. This kind of thing wasn't unusual, it happened from time to time. But today, the number of attacks was unusually high. Still, it wasn't enough to warrant Ethan's personal involvement. His subordinates handled it with ease. Meanwhile, high above the city, countless drones zipped through the air like hummingbirds, their movements swift and precise. Genesis Biotech was keeping a close eye on the situation. Just as I thought. The zombies are starting to fight among themselves, Nathan said, lounging in his office with one leg crossed over the other. Read exclusive content at my virtual library empire. His gaze shifted to the side, where Jessica's team stood nearby. Ahem. Captain Reed, taking down zombie kings must have been exhausting, huh? I think you and your team deserve a few days off. Leave the cleanup to us, Nathan said with a sly smile. Jessica scoffed, her expression dripping with contempt. Oh, I see how it is, Mr. Nathan. We do the hard work of killing the zombie kings, and then you swoop in to collect all the crystal cores and neurocores. Nice try. The teammate next to Jessica chimed in enthusiastically. Exactly, Mr. Nathan. Other people plant the trees, and you just want to pick the fruit. That's not how this works. Nathan forced a sheepish laugh, trying to play it off. Oh, come on now, it's not like that. You're making it sound so bad. But inside, he was grumbling to himself. Damn, they saw right through me. These people are way too sharp. Jessica stood up abruptly, brushing off the conversation. All right, let's move. We've got orders from Sophia. Hunt down as many zombie kings as possible and bring them back to San Bernardino. Yes, ma'am. Her team responded in unison, quickly gathering their gear and heading out the door. Nathan watched them leave, his eyes narrowing as the door slammed shut with a loud bang. His expression immediately shifted to one of urgency. He turned to his assistant, practically barking orders. Hurry, hurry, deploy as many Awakener squads as we can. We can't let Jessica and her team snatch up all the crystal cores. Understood. The female assistant nodded and rushed out of the room. Just as she was leaving, Nathan called after her, a new idea lighting up in his mind. Oh, and one more thing. Post an announcement on the official site. Say that Genesis Biotech is officially restarting the Operation King Hunt initiative. Meanwhile, Ethan was still lounging on his couch, looking as relaxed as ever. But outside his window, the city was anything but calm. After a few days of relative peace, the apocalyptic chaos had returned. The air was filled with the guttural roars and howls of zombies, echoing through the streets. High above the city, a few black crows circled the towering skyscrapers. One of them suddenly swooped down, landing on the 42nd floor window of Ethan's building. Its crimson eyes gleamed with excitement as it tapped its beak against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Dinner. Dinner. Oh, Ethan murmured, sitting up lazily. He stretched his neck with a soft crack and glanced out the window, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. Where should I start? And just like that, his figure vanished into thin air. At the edge of Ethan's territory, the aftermath of a skirmish was still fresh. Zombie corpses were strewn across the ground in grotesque heaps. A few surviving zombies crouched over the bodies, clawing into their skulls to dig out the precious neurocores inside. Laura was among them. Having just taken down the hulking zombie king, she was drenched in foul, black blood. Kneeling on the ground, she dug her claws into the zombie king's skull, stirring it around until she pulled out a crystal core. Without a second thought, and with no regard for the bits of brain matter clinging to it, she shoved the whole thing into her mouth. The scene was bizarre, to say the least. But then Laura's nose twitched. She caught a whiff of something different. Her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing with excitement. She tilted her head slightly, her predatory gaze locking onto a group of figures in the distance. Sure enough, a small team of humans was making their way down the street. It was Jessica's squad. Well, an A-rank zombie king. You don't see that every day, Jessica muttered, her sharp eyes studying Laura from afar. Yeah, no kidding, one of her teammates added. Looks like the LA branch has been feeding their zombies pretty well. Back in San Bernardino, A-rank zombies were practically extinct. Seeing one here was a rare treat. Jessica wasted no time. She began issuing orders with the precision of a seasoned leader. Zoe, you and Joshua handle the elite zombies. The zombie king is mine and Daniel's. Give us 10 minutes, and we'll have her down. Got it, no problem, Zoe replied with a nod. The team moved quickly, splitting up and falling into their assigned roles. Their coordination was seamless, the result of countless hunts together. It was this kind of teamwork that had allowed them to take down so many zombie kings back in San Bernardino. C-128 This has to be an illusion. Hehehehe tilde. Laura's face twisted into her signature eerie grin. It had been days since she last tasted human flesh, and she was craving that flavor again. Without hesitation, she spread her claws wide, her body transforming into a gust of wind as she lunged straight at a group of humans. Behind her, the zombies that had been feasting on neurocores were startled by the commotion. Bloodied mouths let out guttural roars as they too charged toward the humans. What a ferocious zombie! Jessica's brows furrowed as she spun around, drawing a short alloy blade from her side. The team members around her felt their energy surge, each activating their awakener abilities in response. Flame barrier. Joshua bellowed, his voice booming as waves of heat radiated from his body. Flames erupted from his hands, forming a blazing wall that halted the elite zombies in their tracks. Lightning field, shouted another young man, electricity crackling across his body. Dropping to one knee, he slammed his fist into the ground. A surge of lightning exploded outward, spreading across the battlefield. Any zombie that touched it convulsed violently, smoke rising from their charred bodies as they collapsed. Aqua spear. A female awakener nearby glowed with a soft blue light as water droplets began to coalesce around her. Though the power seemed gentle, the spears of water she formed pierced through the zombies with deadly precision. These three were all A-rank elemental awakeners, their abilities formidable. Despite the ferocity of the zombie horde, holding them off for 10 minutes wouldn't be an issue. Meanwhile, Jessica teamed up with a psychic awakener to take on Laura directly. Jessica's ability, Rapid Mirage, enhanced her legs, granting her incredible speed. Her movements left behind afterimages as she darted forward, alloy blade in hand, aiming a slash straight at Laura. Laura countered with her claws, her razor-sharp nails clashing against the blade. Clang, clang, clang. Sparks flew as their strikes collided at blinding speed, their movements so fast it was almost impossible to follow. The psychic awakener beside Jessica extended his mental energy, forming an invisible barrier that pressed toward Laura, attempting to slow her down. But then, something unexpected happened. A flock of crows suddenly swooped down, their wings cutting through the air as they flew over the street. Caw, caw, caw. Their cries were haunting, like the tolling of a death knell. A chilling sense of foreboding washed over the battlefield, as if death itself was drawing near. Huh. The psychic awakener, Daniel, froze. His heightened senses picked up on something ominous. Unease crept into his heart as he glanced upward, noticing the crows circling above a nearby street. And then, out of nowhere, a tall figure appeared below them. His expression was calm, his features strikingly handsome, and he wore a pristine white shirt that seemed untouched by the chaos around him. Daniel, what are you doing? Focus and launch your psychic attack. Jessica shouted, still locked in combat with Laura, her attention fully on the fight. Enjoy exclusive content from my virtual library empire. But Daniel stood frozen, his voice trembling. Captain Reed, look over there. What? Jessica parried Laura's claws with her blade, then leapt back to create some distance. Following Daniel's gaze, she turned to look in the direction he was pointing. What the hell? Jessica's face froze in shock, her mind racing as she tried to process what she was seeing. That figure, it couldn't be. The man in the white shirt, with his cold, sharp features and the crows circling him, it was exactly like the photo. This is impossible. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. He's supposed to be dead. This has to be an illusion. There must be a zombie king nearby with hallucination abilities. Captain, it's real. Daniel's voice cracked, his eyes wide with disbelief. The man, Ethan, began walking toward them, his steps slow and deliberate. As he moved, an oppressive aura spread outward, the domain of the dead unfurling like a storm. The ground beneath him cracked and splintered, as if the earth itself was recoiling from his presence. It was as if a natural disaster had descended upon them. Since absorbing the crystal core of the Bone Claw Zombie King, Ethan's domain of the dead had grown even more terrifying. The awakeners around him felt their breaths hitch, their chests tightening as if they were being crushed under the weight of the ocean. The pressure was suffocating, and it felt like they were moments away from being obliterated. The three elemental awakeners turned to look, their faces pale with shock. Captain, what's going on? Jessica gritted her teeth, her voice strained. We might have killed the wrong one. What? The others stared at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. The overwhelming pressure emanating from Ethan was unmistakable. This was the power of a true zombie king. It was worlds apart from the one they had hunted that night. Absolute domain. This is what a real absolute domain feels like, Jessica muttered, her voice heavy with tension. As Ethan continued to approach, the oppressive force of his aura grew stronger and stronger. The team could barely hold themselves together under the crushing weight. Captain, what do we do now? One of the team members asked, their voice trembling. There's no other choice. The plan's a bust. Daniel, use a psychic barrier to hold off the absolute domain. We're retreating. Jessica barked, her tone sharp and decisive. I'll try. Daniel gritted his teeth, his face pale. The absolute domain was suffocating, and his psychic energy, instead of spreading outward, was being forced back into his own mind. It felt like needles stabbing into his brain, the pain excruciating. Arg! He roared, pushing through the agony as he forced his psychic energy to its absolute limit. He managed to extend a barrier, but it barely reached 6 feet around him. The brief reprieve was enough. The rest of the team seized the opportunity, unleashing every ounce of their energy to fend off the zombie horde, Laura, and the crushing weight of Ethan's domain of the dead. Move! Jessica shouted, her figure blurring as she leapt toward a nearby high-rise. The other awakeners followed her lead, their movements swift and agile as they scrambled up to the rooftop. But as Jessica glanced back, her heart sank. Daniel was still standing in place, unmoving. Hey, what are you doing? Get out of there, she yelled. Captain, I can't make it, Daniel said, his voice weak. His psychic energy was completely drained, and just holding off Ethan's domain for 3 seconds had pushed him to his absolute limit. His body swayed, barely able to stay upright. He didn't have the strength to run. He was sacrificing himself to buy his teammates time to escape. Damn it! Jessica cursed under her breath, her fists clenching as frustration and helplessness surged through her. The rest of the team hesitated, their jaws tight, their faces etched with grief. They knew what Daniel was doing, and it tore at them. Go! Jessica snapped, her voice cutting through their hesitation. Now's not the time to play hero. The others swallowed their emotions and turned, sprinting toward safety. There was no time to argue. But Ethan's figure flickered, and in an instant, he was standing in front of Daniel. The psychic awakener was trembling, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth as he struggled to stay upright. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but cold. You know, I really hate tragic sacrifices. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at Ethan's face. Don't worry, Ethan said, his tone almost casual. None of them are getting away. I'll send them to join you soon enough. Without another word, Ethan reached out, his hand plunging into Daniel's skull with precision. It was quick, painless. He extracted Daniel's crystal core, ending his suffering in an instant. Rest now. Ethan's gaze shifted as he watched Laura leading a pack of elite zombies in pursuit of Jessica and the others. The zombies were relentless, their movements unnervingly agile as they scaled the high-rise with ease, their feral eyes locked on their prey. And then, Ethan vanished again. Jessica and her team were sprinting across the rooftops, leaping from building to building as fast as they could. Below them, the streets were swarming with ferocious zombies, their snarls echoing as they climbed after the fleeing humans. This was the first time Jessica had ever felt so cornered, so utterly outmatched. Her heart was still pounding from the encounter with Ethan. That zombie king, he was on a completely different level. Just the power of his absolute domain had been enough to crush them, leaving them gasping for air. And the way he carried himself, so calm, so detached. It was as if he was toying with them, watching them struggle for his own amusement. Captain, there are too many zombies. We're not going to make it out of here. One of the female team members cried, her face pale and drenched in sweat. Panic was written all over her features. Jessica's sharp eyes scanned their surroundings, assessing the situation. It was bad. Really bad. But then, in the distance, she spotted something. A few drones were zipping through the air, their lights blinking as they moved. That's Nathan's Operation King Hunt squad. Jessica shouted, her voice filled with a glimmer of hope. They're just ahead. Let's move. We'll regroup with them. C-129 is this, hell. The group's eyes lit up at the suggestion. It was a solid plan. Without wasting any time, they headed in that direction. Up ahead, the streets were already a battlefield. Nathan had clearly sent in a significant force, 3 full Awakener squads and 500 armed personnel. These armed fighters weren't just random survivors. They'd been carefully selected and enhanced with the newly developed human evolution serum. Once injected, their strength reached the neurocore stage, making them as formidable as elite zombies in combat. Their weapons had also evolved. Guns were no longer the go-to choice. Instead, every single one of them wielded titanium alloy machetes. Why? Because elite zombies had bones so tough that bullets were often ineffective. A well-forged machete, however, could get the job done. In fact, with enough skill, one clean swing could decapitate a zombie, saving both time and resources. Among them were also second-generation cyborgs, controlled by advanced AI. These units were cold, calculating, and terrifyingly efficient, with combat capabilities that rivaled the best. To be fair, Genesis Biotech had made impressive strides in recent months. Their advancements were nothing short of remarkable. But compared to Ethan's crew, they still felt like small fry. In the chaos of the zombie horde, one figure stood out like a mountain bulldozer. His massive frame was impossible to miss as he roared and hurled wrecked cars from the street into clusters of fighters like they were toys. Nearby, the zombie tiger Snowy let out an earth-shaking roar, its sheer presence enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. With one swipe of its massive paw, it turned a human into nothing more than a smear on the pavement. And then there was PhD, lurking in the shadows of an alley. His sinister gaze scanned the battlefield, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the time came, he unleashed devastating psychic attacks, leaving the Awakeners clutching their heads in agony. The leader of Operation King Hunt, Captain Jack Sullivan, stood at the forefront. A rugged man with sharp features and piercing eyes, he surveyed the scene with a grim expression. Something's not right. Why are there more zombies showing up? Jack muttered, his voice heavy with suspicion. According to their intel, the zombie king in this area was supposed to be dead. Without a leader, the horde shouldn't have this level of coordination. Yet here they were, organized, relentless, and, worst of all, working together. They should be tearing each other apart by now. Jack's eyes narrowed as he spotted another wave of elite zombies pouring in from a street corner. Their blood-stained faces twisted into feral snarls as they charged forward. More of them. This was getting out of hand. If this kept up, they wouldn't last much longer. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from a nearby high-rise. Jack turned just in time to see several figures scrambling down the building in a panic. They leapt to the ground, landing in a heap, battered and breathless. It was Jessica's squad, clearly fleeing for their lives. But right on their heels was a swarm of zombies, pouring out of the building like a flood. Among them was Queen Laura, her blood-soaked figure radiating a terrifying, predatory aura. The zombies didn't stop. They leapt from the building one after another, crashing to the ground with sickening thuds before immediately resuming their pursuit. "Are you kidding me?" Jack shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. He quickly barked orders to his team. "Watch out for the zombies coming from above." The Awakeners snapped to attention, launching attacks to hold the line. But not everyone was quick enough. A few were crushed under the falling zombies, their screams cut short as they were torn apart. Laura's twisted grin spread across her face as she surveyed the chaos. Well, this is a nice little gathering," she sneered. In a blur, she darted into the ranks of the armed personnel, slicing through them like a scythe through wheat. Neurocore enhanced or not, they were no match for her. "You brought this horde here?" Jack demanded, glaring at Jessica. Jessica, drenched in sweat and struggling to catch her breath, glanced back at the zombies now being held off, barely. "I came to warn you. The zombie king here isn't dead. You need to retreat. Now." "What?" Jack's face twisted in shock. His brows furrowed deeply as frustration bubbled up. First, they were told the king was dead. Now, it wasn't. Was this some kind of sick joke? But looking at the horde's behavior, it was hard to deny. This level of coordination could only mean one thing. A zombie king was pulling the strings. Jack's gut sank. If Jessica was right, they were in way over their heads. "Fall back. Everyone. Retreat," he shouted. The order was a relief to the team, who had been itching to get out of there. They immediately began pulling back, fighting as they went. But the retreat was anything but smooth. Zombies pounced on stragglers, ripping them apart in a frenzy of blood and gore. "This is insane. These zombies are way too strong. Just keep moving. Don't stop." The Awakeners were shaken to their core. This wasn't like any other area they'd fought in. The zombies here were faster, stronger, and far more aggressive, likely due to their advanced evolution. Find your next read at my virtual library empire. Behind them, Bulldozer, Laura, and Snowy gave chase, relentless in their pursuit. Jessica's squad, being the fastest, managed to pull ahead. As they neared the edge of the danger zone, they finally allowed themselves a moment of relief. They'd made it out. Barely. But the fear lingered. Today had been far too close. One wrong move, and they'd have been dead. Or maybe, surviving this at all was just dumb luck. But just then, out of the corner of her eye, Jessica caught sight of something. Her gaze snapped upward, locking onto the rooftop of a towering skyscraper ahead. A tall, slender figure stood at the edge, silhouetted against the sky. "What the?" Jessica froze in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. She threw out her arm, signaling the others. "Stop. Everyone. Stop. What's wrong, Captain Reed?" One of the Awakeners asked, confused by her sudden urgency. "He's up there." Jessica's voice was tight, her expression grim. Though the figure was far away, she had no doubt. That face, that sharp, handsome profile, the white dress shirt fluttering in the wind, it was burned into her memory. There was no mistaking him. Who? The others exchanged puzzled glances, but their eyes followed hers. Soon enough, they too noticed the figure standing on the rooftop. Ethan. He stood at the edge of the skyscraper, the wind whipping around him, his white shirt billowing like a banner. From where he stood, it seemed as though one more step would send him plummeting into the abyss below. His gaze swept over the streets beneath him, taking in the chaos, the abandoned cars scattered like forgotten toys, the fleeing humans reduced to tiny, insignificant shadows. Everything was within his sight. His domain. His kingdom. And he watched it all with the cold, unyielding gaze of a king surveying his realm. "It's time to close the net." His voice was calm, almost casual, but the moment the words left his lips, the ground below erupted. Thick, writhing vines burst forth, snaking across the street like living serpents. They wove together into a massive, impenetrable web, cutting off the human's escape route. Ah! Screams tore through the air as the vines lashed out, grabbing several people and hoisting them into the air. The sharp tendrils pierced their flesh, draining them dry in seconds. Their bodies shriveled, collapsing into lifeless husks. Damn it! Jessica's eyes widened in horror as she took in the scene. Her heart sank like a stone. They were trapped. With the horde closing in from behind and the vines blocking their path ahead, there was nowhere left to run. The zombies had them surrounded, and it was clear this wasn't some random ambush. No, this was a carefully laid trap. A game. And they were the mice. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. That zombie king. Ethan. He was far stronger than she'd imagined. And worse, he'd been toying with them the entire time. Captain, what do we do now? One of her team members asked, their voice trembling with fear. Jessica clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. There's no way out. We fight to the death. The others exchanged grim looks but nodded. Understood. Behind them, the sound of the horde grew louder. Laura, Bulldozer, and the rest of the elite zombies were closing in fast, their snarls and roars echoing like a death knell. The slower awakeners were already being overtaken, dragged to the ground and torn apart. The air was filled with the sickening sounds of flesh being ripped, bones snapping, and the agonized screams of the dying. The once 500-strong force of Neurocore-enhanced fighters had been reduced to just a few dozen. The rest were either dead or worse, unrecognizable pieces of what had once been human. Jack stood amidst the chaos, his face a mask of fury and despair. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, his eyes bloodshot as he took in the carnage around him. Everywhere he looked, there were zombies, feral, monstrous creatures tearing into his comrades. In the distance, crows circled overhead, their sharp beaks stained with blood as they picked at the scattered remains. The scene was grotesque, surreal, like something out of a nightmare. As this, hell. C-130 Your mission is complete. However, one phrase surfaced in Jack's mind, the forbidden zone of humanity. Around him, a few other crystal core level awakeners were desperately trying to hold their ground. Water prison. A female teammate poured every ounce of her energy into activating her ability. But she wasn't using it to fight off the zombies. Instead, she trapped herself within it, because the sheer number of zombies around her was overwhelming. Her entire body was drenched in sweat as she gritted her teeth, struggling to hold on. That faint blue energy was the last trace of color she would leave in this world. Read exclusive chapters at my virtual library empire. Schlick. Suddenly, a black claw pierced through her chest from behind, sending warm blood splattering everywhere. The searing pain made her body convulse uncontrollably, and the energy surrounding her dissipated in an instant. Her face twisted in agony as she slowly turned her head, only to see a pitch-black face glaring at her with feral malice. It was none other than Shadow, the Dark Predator. Captain, save me, she whimpered, her voice trembling with despair. But Jessica, standing ahead, merely glanced back at her. Without a hint of emotion, she turned away and swung her short blade, cutting down 2 zombies in her path. Others might not escape, but that didn't mean she couldn't. Jessica's ability, Rapid Mirage, enhanced her physical speed to an extraordinary degree. In this apocalyptic world, it was practically a survival cheat code. Her figure flickered as she darted forward, stepping on the heads of several zombies before leaping onto the wall of a high-rise building. Like a spider, she clung to the surface with ease. She glanced back briefly, watching as her teammates were slaughtered one by one. I'm out of here. You guys will have to hold them off, she muttered coldly. With a graceful leap, Jessica landed on the rooftop, her movements as fluid as ever. Jack caught this out of the corner of his eye, his brows furrowing deeply. She actually ran. Then again, it wasn't surprising. In the apocalypse, this was just how things worked. If he had her kind of ability, he might have done the same. But when his gaze shifted to another direction, his expression instantly turned to shock. Because Ethan, who had been standing at the edge of the building just moments ago, was gone. Jessica darted across the rooftops, her movements swift and precise. Her only thought was to get as far away from this area as possible. No, she needed to get out of Los Angeles altogether. She was never coming back here again. This place was nothing short of hell on earth. But just as she was planning her next move, her body suddenly felt heavy, as if an immense pressure had slammed into her like a meteor crashing to the ground. Her once lightning-fast movements came to an abrupt halt, leaving her frozen in place. Shit. That familiar, suffocating pressure made her heart sink. She didn't even need to look to know what, or who, it was. But she did anyway. And there he was. A tall, imposing figure stood ahead of her, like an immovable mountain, an insurmountable barrier. Ethan. His cold, unfeeling eyes locked onto Jessica. This so-called righteous human was nothing but a hypocrite. First, she sold out her teammates to buy herself time. Then, she lured the zombies toward Jack. And finally, she told the others to fight to the death while she made her escape. Now, Under Ethan's piercing gaze, Jessica felt every hair on her body stand on end. Cold sweat dripped down her forehead as her breathing grew erratic. Her ability was speed-based, but her physical strength was lacking. There was no way she could break through the terrifying domain of the dead that Ethan had unleashed. Please. Let me go. I can serve you," Jessica stammered, her lips trembling. Even in her final moments, she refused to give up, desperately clinging to the hope of survival. Ethan's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Your mission is complete." "Huh? What? What do you mean?" Jessica stammered, utterly confused. But before she could process his words, Ethan's figure blurred and appeared right in front of her. "Feel free to visit Los Angeles again, in your next life." With that, Ethan raised his hand and slashed downward. A gleaming tachi materialized in his grip, slicing cleanly through Jessica's jaw and up to her skull. Blood sprayed into the air. A single crystal core shot out from her body, spinning as it fell. Hypocritical humans must face judgment, the judgment of the zombie king. Ethan waved his hand, collecting her lifeless body. Standing atop the high-rise, he glanced into the distance, where a surveillance drone buzzed faintly in the air. His gaze locked onto the drone, but instead of destroying it, he raised his hand and gave it a casual wave. Genesis Biotech headquarters. Nathan was dozing off in his office chair when the sharp clack of high heels echoed down the hallway. The sound grew louder until his assistant burst through the door without knocking. "Mr. Nathan, we've got a major problem." "Huh?" Nathan jolted awake, nearly falling out of his chair. He rubbed his bleary eyes, trying to focus. "What is it? Did Jessica steal the crystal cores?" "No, sir. She's dead." "What?" Nathan's eyes widened in disbelief, his mind racing. "Dead? How? See for yourself." The assistant quickly tapped on her laptop, connecting it to the projector. A video began to play, captured by the drone. The footage showed the streets of Los Angeles, overrun with hordes of zombies. Nathan's team of awakeners was being overwhelmed, pinned to the ground, and torn apart. Even the cybernetic-enhanced soldiers were being dismantled limb by limb, their mechanical parts scattered like broken toys. The scene shifted to the rooftop of a high-rise. A tall, imposing figure stood there, emotionless, watching the carnage below as if it were all part of his plan. "Wait a second," Nathan shouted, leaning forward, his eyes glued to the screen. That figure, it was too familiar. It was the face that haunted his nightmares. "Am I still dreaming? Maybe I need to go back to sleep." "Mr. Nathan," the assistant said gravely, "the zombie king isn't dead." "That's impossible," Nathan muttered, pinching his thigh hard enough to leave a mark. "Nope, he was definitely awake. Jessica said she killed him." He protested, his voice rising in desperation. "She lied. The one she killed was a decoy. And now, all the awakeners you sent, they're gone. Wiped out." Nathan fell silent, his face pale as he turned back to the screen. The footage showed Ethan finishing off Jessica, then casually waving at the drone as if he knew exactly who was watching. "Holy crap," Nathan sucked in a sharp breath, feeling lightheaded. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might pass out from the sheer shock. "Mr. Nathan, are you okay?" The assistant rushed over, patting his back to help him catch his breath. "Jessica. That idiot. That absolute idiot," Nathan muttered under his breath, no longer caring about maintaining his composure. His frustration boiled over, and he slumped back in his chair, utterly defeated. This was worse than eating 100,000 flies. No, 1,000,000 flies. His stomach churned with disgust and regret. Even if they couldn't beat the zombies outright, they should have at least been able to hold their ground. But now, thanks to Jessica's incompetence, they'd handed the enemy a decisive advantage. Jessica was dead weight. Hiring her as an external asset. I just can't. Nathan trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. He had no words to describe how badly this had gone. If he'd known it would turn out like this, he never would have brought her on board. This was a disaster. A complete and utter disaster. After taking a moment to steady himself, Nathan's expression darkened. His frustration turned to anger as he grabbed the satellite phone on his desk and dialed Sophia's number. Someone was going to answer for this mess. The phone rang a few times before Sophia picked up, her voice as calm and lazy as ever. "Nathan, what's got you so worked up?" Nathan's temper flared at her nonchalant tone. "Sophia, do you have any idea what your people just did?" "What's the problem, Nathan? Why are you yelling?" Sophia replied, her voice dripping with indifference. Nathan clenched his teeth, his grip tightening on the phone. Your so-called team has completely screwed me over. I've suffered massive losses because of them. Sophia, I'm asking you, are you going to take responsibility for this or not? Ellipsis. C-131 fungi. What did I even do to you? And what do you mean, take responsibility? Sophia looked utterly baffled, staring at Nathan like he was some wronged housewife sulking over spilled milk. Jessica and the others are dead. Nathan snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. He then launched into a detailed recount of everything that had happened, leaving out no detail, no matter how small. Sophia froze, her expression shifting to one of shock. Jessica. Dead. That didn't make sense. In her mind, Jessica was sharp, resourceful, and practically a survival expert. Even if a mission went south, death seemed like the least likely outcome. But now, here they were. Cough. Mr. Nathan, maybe it was just an accident. They must have made a mistake, Sophia offered, though her tone lacked conviction. And what about the people I lost? What am I supposed to do about that? Nathan shot back, his frustration bubbling over. Well, Sophia hesitated, knowing full well that her team bore most of the responsibility for this disaster. She was at a loss for words. Look, don't get worked up. Failure happens. No one can guarantee a 100% success rate every single time, right? Not worked up. Are you kidding me? At this rate, zombies are gonna be knocking on my front door any minute now. Nathan's voice rose, his irritation palpable. And if my company gets wiped out, you think HQ's just gonna let this slide? You'll be in just as much trouble as me. The truth was, both of them worked for Genesis Biotech, and failure wasn't exactly something the company tolerated. If you couldn't deliver, you were replaced. And the replacements? Well, let's just say their fates were grim. Live experiments or full-on biomodification. Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples as she tried to think. This whole situation was a mess, and she was starting to feel like she'd shot herself in the foot. Relax. I've still got an A+ grade triple modified unit I haven't deployed yet, she said, trying to sound confident. Forget it. Don't even bother, Nathan replied, clearly done with her excuses. He didn't trust her anymore. This was something he'd have to take up with HQ directly. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Ethan was leading his crew as they cleaned up the aftermath. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, and the sound of zombies feasting on flesh filled the area. The fight had been tough, sure, but the rewards. Oh, they were worth it. The elite zombies under Ethan's command had grown even stronger, their numbers swelling with each victory. Ethan himself had scored big, 5 A-grade crystal cores and several B+1s. Too much. Way too much. There was no way he could consume it all at once. Just as he was contemplating what to do with the surplus, Big Ears came sprinting over, his oversized ears flapping wildly as he ran. Boss, there's some human activity near the edge of our territory, in the forest. Not sure what they're up to, but it's a lot of movement, Big Ears reported, panting slightly. Oh, Ethan nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. It was clear that Genesis Biotech wasn't the only group sniffing around. Other human factions were starting to make moves too, probably the Black Hand Legion, some random survivor groups, or maybe even an official government shelter. But Ethan wasn't particularly concerned. These small fry weren't worth his personal attention. He'd let his underlings handle it. With that, he turned and headed back to his base. There was, however, one lingering issue that he couldn't ignore: the mutated fungi near the graveyard. Those things were a real problem. They had the ability to mimic their surroundings, making them incredibly dangerous. If left unchecked, who knew what kind of monstrosity they might evolve into? Ethan figured it was time to deal with them. Besides, he had another idea brewing in the back of his mind. If he could take out the fungi, maybe he'd get his hands on another crystal core seed. With that, he could create a 6th zombie king to add to his growing army. Back in the human world, Genesis Biotech was still making waves online. Their recent announcement about restarting the Operation King Hunt had stirred up a lot of buzz. What's going on? Why is it so quiet all of a sudden? Did Genesis Biotech manage to take down the Zombie King yet? No clue. There's been no updates. Wasn't this supposed to be live streamed? Why isn't the announcement being updated? Quote. The comments under the announcement were piling up fast, with survivors from all over Los Angeles chiming in. But just as the discussion was reaching a fever pitch, the screen suddenly refreshed, and a single line of text appeared. The post you commented on has been deleted. Huh, what's going on? Why was the post deleted? No idea. The survivors stared at their screens, utterly confused. The day of carnage had come to an end. As night fell, darkness blanketed the land, and Ethan's territory returned to its usual eerie calm. Well, almost. From the forest at the edge of his domain, the occasional zombie growl echoed through the night. It seemed a few stray humans had wandered too close, likely trying to scout the area. Their curiosity had cost them their lives, their screams silenced as they became nothing more than a midnight snack for the undead. Inside his base, Ethan lounged on a worn leather sofa, swirling a crimson liquid in a wine glass. With a single gulp, he downed the contents, savoring the rush of power as the A-grade crystal core he'd absorbed earlier coursed through him. His body felt alive, buzzing with energy. He stood up slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The graveyard was pitch black under the shroud of night. A cold wind swept through, carrying with it a mournful wail that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Behind the graveyard, the trees in the forest swayed, their branches creaking and rustling like skeletal fingers beckoning in the dark. Ethan's figure materialized amidst the shadows, his sharp eyes cutting through the gloom as if the darkness itself bent to his will. What's hiding out here? He muttered to himself, stepping forward. His form shimmered briefly before vanishing again, blending seamlessly into the night as he activated his cloaking ability. It was as if the darkness had swallowed him whole. The forest air was damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. Ethan moved silently, weaving through the trees like a phantom. The silence was oppressive. No insects chirped, no animals stirred. But the trees, they were alive in a different way. Clusters of grotesque red growths clung to the trunks, pulsating faintly like beating hearts. The fleshy tumors were packed so densely in some areas that they seemed to breathe, their rhythmic throbbing almost hypnotic. Beneath these growths lay piles of bones, some animal, some human. Some were neatly stacked, while others were scattered haphazardly across the forest floor. The sight was grotesque, a macabre reminder of what happened to anything that ventured too close. It was clear. This part of the forest had been completely overtaken by the mutated fungi. It was a death zone, a place where no other life could survive. But Ethan wasn't fazed. His steps were steady as he ventured deeper into the fungal territory. The further he went, the stronger the metallic tang of blood became, faint at first but growing more distinct with each step. Humans, Ethan murmured, his senses sharpening. He quickened his pace, following the scent until he came across a body lying on the ground. It was a woman, and she hadn't been dead for long. Her corpse was riddled with red fungal growths of varying sizes, the tumors sprouting from her body like grotesque flowers. Even her face wasn't spared. 2 large growths protruded from her cheeks, distorting her features. Stay updated via my virtual library empire. Yet, strangely enough, her expression wasn't one of pain or terror. She looked peaceful, as if she'd simply fallen asleep. Died looking pretty. Huh, Ethan muttered, crouching down to examine her. He couldn't help but wonder what her final moments had been like. She was probably one of the humans drawn out by the chaos caused by Genesis Biotech's recent activities. Maybe she'd been curious, hoping to see what was going on. Instead, she'd wandered into the wrong part of the forest, straight into the fungal zone. She hadn't even made it to Ethan's territory before meeting her end. Well, that's one less snack for my crew, Ethan thought with a smirk, though he wasn't particularly bothered. As he stood there, lost in thought, a faint rustling sound broke the silence. It was subtle at first, but it quickly grew louder, like something was shifting and squirming nearby. Ethan's gaze snapped toward the source of the noise. The red growths on the trees were moving. Slowly but surely, several of the tumors began to converge, merging together into a single mass. And then, the mass began to take shape. It was humanoid. The figure staggered as it rose, its form becoming more defined with each passing second. Limbs stretched out, a torso took shape, and a face began to emerge. Even the texture of clothing was mimicked, the details eerily precise. By the time it fully stood, it was no longer just a mass of fungi. It was a woman. And not just any woman. It was an exact replica of the corpse lying on the ground. C-132 here, eat up. Ethan watched with his own eyes as the fungus morphed into a human shape. It was nothing short of incredible. He wasn't exactly a scholar and had no clue how it worked, but he'd heard of something called an enzyme before, something that could slow down its own metabolism to mimic life. People called it the gene mimic enzyme. Once the woman fully took shape, her expression was blank, her eyes hollow. Without a word, she started walking, step by step, into the distance. Ethan guessed she was probably looking for a new host. Most likely, one of the dead woman's companions. Which meant there were other humans in this forest. Without hesitation, Ethan decided to follow her. After about 10 minutes of walking, they left the fungal zone. The forest returned to its usual state. It was still pitch black, but the faint chirping of insects could be heard from the grass and treetops. Occasionally, he'd spot mutated spiders the size of basketballs weaving massive webs between the branches. Ethan sniffed the air lightly. It didn't take long for him to catch the scent of humans. Not far ahead stood a massive tree, so large it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle it. The tree was dead and withered, surrounded by piles of overgrown weeds, clearly disturbed by human activity. The woman's steps were leading her straight to the tree. Beneath the thick layer of weeds was a hidden hollow in the tree. Inside, 3 young men were huddled together. The space was cramped, dark, and damp, the kind of place that made you feel suffocated just by being there. The 3 of them were pressed so close together they could hear each other breathing. One of them, a scruffy-looking guy with a patchy beard and ragged clothes, was fiddling with a phone, tilting it this way and that in frustration. Signal's crap. I can't connect to Genesis Biotech's network at all. Try again tomorrow when we get closer to the edge of the forest, another guy suggested. No point wasting battery now. Charging out here wasn't easy. They were completely reliant on solar panels. Yeah, I guess, the scruffy man nodded, a glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes. Man, I wonder what it's like out there. If Genesis Biotech really managed to clear out the zombies in the city, life's gonna get a whole lot better. No kidding, the second guy said, his voice tinged with excitement. Once we join Genesis Biotech, we won't have to worry about food or supplies anymore. He was clearly sick of hiding out in this godforsaken forest. But the third guy wasn't sharing their optimism. His brows were furrowed, his face dark with frustration. Ivy's been gone all afternoon, and you two are just sitting here fantasizing. So what? If she's not back, she's probably dead, the scruffy man said casually, shrugging. In a world like this, people dying was just normal. A girl disappearing for this long. Odds were, she wasn't coming back. The third guy's face twisted with anger. He grabbed the scruffy man by the collar and snarled, "Shut your damn mouth. Say one more word, and I'll rip it off your face." All right, calm down. The second guy quickly stepped in to defuse the situation. Sam, we can't start fighting each other. Let's stick together. We'll go look for Ivy tomorrow morning, okay? The scruffy man scoffed but turned his head away, clearly not interested in arguing further. Sam clenched his jaw, his hands trembling as he let go of the scruffy man's shirt. He leaned back against the tree wall, his expression clouded with worry. It was obvious. Sam and Ivy weren't just casual acquaintances. He cared about her deeply, maybe even loved her. The two of them had met while fleeing the apocalypse. For months, they'd stuck together, relying on each other to survive. There was even a time when Sam injured his leg, and the scent of his blood attracted a mutated beast. While everyone else ran for their lives, Ivy stayed behind and saved him. After that, she never left his side, nursing him back to health and watching over him. Enjoy exclusive adventures from my virtual library empire. Ivy's a good person, Sam muttered to himself. She wasn't like the others, selfish and cold. Even in the middle of this nightmare, she still held onto her kindness. Every time he thought about her, he felt an overwhelming urge to go out and find her. But wandering through the forest at night, that was as good as signing your own death warrant. But just then, a faint rustling sound came from outside the tree hollow, like someone walking through the weeds, their footsteps brushing against the overgrowth. Who's there? The scruffy man was quick to react, sitting up straight like a startled rabbit, his eyes darting toward the entrance. Ivy. It's Ivy. She's back. Sam's face lit up with hope, his exhaustion vanishing in an instant. He scrambled to his feet, ready to rush out. Wait, are you out of your mind? The scruffy man grabbed his arm, holding him back. It's the middle of the night. How could it possibly be Ivy? Let go of me. Who else could it be? Sam snapped, shaking him off and climbing out of the hollow without hesitation. The scruffy man frowned deeply, muttering under his breath, "Love makes people stupid as hell." But there was no stopping him now. With no other choice, the scruffy man and the other guy followed Sam out to see what was going on. The 3 of them emerged from the hollow. Under the pale moonlight filtering through the branches, shadows danced across the forest floor. And there, not far away, stood a woman. Ivy, you're finally back. Sam's face broke into a wide smile, all his earlier worry melting away. He jogged toward her, waving enthusiastically. But the scruffy man and the other guy froze in place, their eyes widening in disbelief. It really was her. How was that even possible? The two of them exchanged uneasy glances, keeping their distance from the woman. Sam, oblivious to their hesitation, called out, "Where have you been all afternoon? Do you have any idea how worried I was?" "Don't worry about me. I'm fine," Ivy replied, her lips curling into a smile. But something about it was off. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, the corners pulling up to her cheekbones in a way that was eerily symmetrical. The smile didn't reach her eyes. It was stiff, almost grotesque. The scruffy man sucked in a sharp breath, his unease growing. The longer he looked at her, the more wrong it felt. The other guy leaned in and whispered, "Sam, Ivy doesn't seem the same as before." "What are you talking about? Stop being so dramatic," Sam shot back, waving him off. Ivy's gaze shifted toward the two of them, her tone soft but questioning. "What's wrong with you guys? Why are you standing so far away? I was out in the forest gathering mushrooms this afternoon. That's why I was late." "Mushrooms." The scruffy man blinked, momentarily thrown off. For a second, she sounded normal again. Had he imagined it? Was he just being paranoid? Ivy reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of white button mushrooms. They looked fresh, plump, and perfectly edible, almost too perfect, given the state of the world. "Here, eat up. They won't stay fresh for long," she said, holding them out with a smile. The scruffy man's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He hadn't eaten in what felt like forever, and his stomach growled at the sight of the mushrooms. But, could they really be trusted? He hesitated, glancing at Sam, who was already reaching for one. Of course he's gonna eat it, the scruffy man thought. Let's see what happens to him first. Sure enough, Sam didn't even pause. He grabbed a mushroom and popped it into his mouth, chewing with a satisfied grin. "These are amazing, Ivy. I can't believe you found so many normal mushrooms. You're incredible. Just lucky, I guess," Ivy said with a soft laugh, her eyes flicking toward the scruffy man and the other guy. "What are you two waiting for? Come on, dig in." The scruffy man stayed rooted to the spot, his expression still wary. His eyes darted to Sam, watching him closely for any signs of, well, anything. But Sam seemed fine. Completely fine. Then he looked back at the mushrooms in Ivy's hand. They were just plain white button mushrooms, the kind you'd toss into a stew or saute in butter back when life was normal. Before the world fell apart, they were the kind of thing you'd see at a barbecue or a family dinner. Harmless. Familiar. The scruffy man's mouth started watering. The more he thought about it, the hungrier he got. C-133 The Queen. At this moment, Ethan was silently observing, noticing that the mutated fungus had indeed evolved significantly. It had learned how to deceive and was getting better at mimicking human expressions. The scruffy man, in the end, couldn't resist the temptation of the mushroom. His last shred of rationality was defeated by hunger. He took a few steps forward, grabbed the mushroom, and took a bite. His eyes lit up. It seemed genuinely delicious. Then, he started devouring it like a starving wolf. In no time, the piece of mushroom was gone. "Got any more?" he asked. "Sure do." Ivy grinned, pulling out another piece of a white button mushroom. "Hey, save some for me." The last young man, seeing the other two eating so happily and seemingly unharmed, panicked at the thought of missing out. He dropped his guard completely and stepped forward to grab a mushroom for himself. And just like that, all three of them ended up eating quite a bit of the mushrooms. But as they ate, their gazes grew increasingly unfocused, as if they were sinking into some kind of blissful trance. Their expressions now were eerily identical to the woman's right before she died. Seeing this, Ivy's grin stretched wide, almost unnaturally so, her cheeks lifting to reveal a sinister and chilling smile. "Follow me," she said. He. Okay," the three men replied, their faces plastered with vacant, foolish smiles. They looked like they'd lost all sense, their hands reaching out as if trying to grab invisible stars in the air. It was obvious. They were already hallucinating, lost in some euphoric dream, likely their last before death. "It actually has hallucinogenic properties," Ethan muttered to himself from a distance, analyzing the situation. The three young men, now completely dazed and mindless, looked like puppets on strings as they followed Ivy toward the fungal zone. Where are they going? Ethan could feel it. Their human aura was changing. They were already parasitized by the fungus. Perhaps because of their enhanced awakened physiques, the red tumors hadn't sprouted on their bodies yet, but it was only a matter of time. As the group moved forward, Ethan quickly followed, keeping a safe distance. Stay updated via my virtual library empire. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to find the fungal core. Thanks to Ethan's stealth abilities, Ivy didn't notice him at all. As they walked deeper into the forest, the surroundings grew eerily quiet. Soon, the red tumors began to reappear, this time in even greater density. When they reached the center, the scene was horrifying. Piles of white bones were stacked high. Human skulls, bird skeletons, all layered on top of one another. Clatter. The bone pile began to rattle. Something underneath was moving, writhing, as if it was about to break through the surface and emerge. Underground. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he focused on the scene. Before long, several humanoid figures began to form, rising from the bone pile. Among them, one figure stood out. A tall, slender figure wearing a pristine white shirt. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan blurted out in disbelief. The figure's face, it was identical to his own. Clearly, the fungus here had mimicked his appearance. Among the other humanoid figures, one was particularly familiar, thin, with sharp, claw-like nails. It was Laura. The rest of the figures were strangers to Ethan, but one thing was clear: they were all people the mutated fungus had encountered or killed before. The other, Ethan, radiated the strongest presence among the mimics. It was obvious, this was the ruler of the area. The surrounding humanoid figures, along with the red tumors growing everywhere, were its minions, or perhaps more accurately, its offspring. After all, they were all spawned from its spores, growing bit by bit. Ethan couldn't help but click his tongue in frustration. If this thing was allowed to keep growing, it might actually manage to create an entire zombie army that looked just like him. Good thing he'd found it early. He had to deal with it now. Ivy, upon seeing the other, Ethan, immediately adopted a posture of utmost reverence. "I brought back the prey," Ivy said, her tone dripping with pride. "Well done." The other, Ethan, replied with a nod, clearly pleased. Its mimicry was leagues ahead of the others, so lifelike it was uncanny. Ethan, watching from the shadows, couldn't help but think that if there were a contest for mimicking him, this fungal copy would take first place, and he'd only come in second. Meanwhile, the three young men were still in their dazed, foolish state, swiping at the imaginary stars in front of them, blissfully unaware of the death creeping closer. "Please, let the queen enjoy the feast," Ivy continued, bowing slightly. Queen. Ethan's brow furrowed at the strange title. It felt off, but after a moment's thought, he figured it might be because the fake him was the fungal hive's mother organism. The so-called queen was just about to make its move on the three men, ready to claim its meal. Ethan, however, wasn't about to let his potential leads, or the fungus's food supply, be snatched away. He stepped out of the shadows, dropping his stealth entirely. His figure emerged from the darkness of the forest, standing tall and unyielding. The mutated fungus immediately sensed his presence. "We have an intruder." The queen turned its head, locking eyes with Ethan. For a moment, the two Ethans stared each other down, their gazes sharp and unrelenting. The fake Ethan's expression twisted into something feral and aggressive. Without hesitation, it lunged at him. Ethan's eyes glinted coldly. In an instant, his domain of the dead unfolded, a wave of oppressive energy rippling outward like a tidal surge. Boom, boom, boom. Several nearby trees exploded into splinters under the sheer pressure. The mimics froze mid-motion, as if someone had hit pause on their movements. Amid the flying debris of grass and wood, Ethan drew his tachi. Flames erupted along the blade, roaring to life as he swung it forward in a single, decisive slash. Whoosh! The blade cut through the air with a mournful hum, slicing cleanly through several of the humanoid figures. They didn't bleed. Instead, a white, spore-like substance scattered into the air. But as soon as it touched the flames, it ignited with a crackling pop pop pop, burning fiercely. The remaining mimics recoiled, their expressions flickering with fear. "They're afraid of fire," Ethan noted, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. He surged forward, his tachi slashing in wide arcs, setting the forest ablaze as he went. The once dark woods were now illuminated by the bright, flickering glow of firelight. The queen's expression darkened, its brows furrowing in frustration. It quickly summoned reinforcements. The red tumors scattered throughout the forest began to writhe and shift, merging together to form humanoid shapes, or even animals. A swarm of fungal creatures, ranging from tiny rats to massive black bears, charged at Ethan all at once. But despite their numbers, these creatures were weak. They were no match for Ethan's domain of the dead. The moment they stepped into its range, the overwhelming pressure crushed them into nothing but pulp. They posed no real threat. However, amidst the chaos of battle, something unexpected happened. In the distance, Sam and the other two young men began to stir. They shook their heads, their eyes clearing as they snapped out of their hallucinations. The noise and commotion of the fight had jolted them back to reality. What's going on? The youngest of the three asked, his voice filled with confusion. He looked around, dazed, as if he'd just woken from a long dream. Sam's face twisted with urgency. Ivy. Where's Ivy? Ivy, are you kidding me? We've been played. The scruffy man roared, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Though the three of them had broken free from the hallucination, their bodies were already parasitized. Their life force was draining rapidly, leaving them weaker by the second. Sam's gaze locked onto the scene ahead. Through the flames, he saw a figure burning, a figure with half its body consumed by fire. But even with only half a face remaining, he could still recognize her. It was Ivy. Is she really dead? Sam's eyes went hollow, his face etched with profound sorrow. But as his gaze shifted to the monstrous fungal creatures in the firelight, his expression twisted into one of fury. It's your fault. You killed Ivy. He screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Kill them. He roared, charging forward with reckless abandon. Ellipsis. C-134 Tumor Giant. Sam, ignoring his injuries, unleashed the last of his strength, throwing himself into a desperate fight against the monsters swarming around him. This guy's insane, muttered the scruffy man, his brows furrowed in tension. His eyes darted around, clearly weighing the idea of making a run for it. But the dense jungle was crawling with monsters, all converging on their location. There was no way out. The younger man beside him looked even more shaken. What do we do? He asked, his voice trembling. There's no other choice. We fight our way out. The scruffy man gritted his teeth, pulling out a dagger. With a grim determination, he too charged into the fray, slashing at the creatures. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Ethan was the undeniable center of attention. Surrounded by countless monsters, he moved like a force of nature, cutting through the mutated fungal creatures as if they were nothing. Each swing of his blade left a trail of destruction. In a flash, he shifted his focus and charged straight toward the mother organism. The mother organism's face twisted with rage. It raised its arms, and a thick cloud of fungal spores erupted from its body, forming a dense, white mist that surged forward like a dragon made of smoke. Ethan didn't flinch. With a single thought, his domain of the dead expanded outward, its oppressive force scattering the spore cloud instantly. The domain continued to spread, enveloping the mother organism in its suffocating grasp. A sickening sound echoed through the air. Crack, crack, crack. The mother organism's body began to contort as if an invisible hand were crushing it like a lump of clay. Its once imposing form started to collapse inward, its shape becoming grotesque and unrecognizable. There can be only one. Ethan muttered under his breath, though he immediately felt like he'd stolen the line from the wrong movie. Still, he shrugged it off. No time to dwell on that now. With his blade igniting in flames, he closed the distance to the mother organism in an instant and swung his fiery tachi in a decisive arc. The sharp blade sliced cleanly through its body. AAA arc. The mother organism let out a piercing, ear-splitting shriek that felt like it could shatter eardrums. But it wasn't dead yet. Instead, its body began to swell rapidly, grotesquely. In mere moments, bulbous red tumors started to sprout all over its form, one after another, until its entire body was covered in them. The tumors pulsed and throbbed, growing larger and more numerous until the creature stood over 10 feet tall, a towering, grotesque mass of flesh and tumors. It no longer had a face. Its entire body was a writhing, pulsating nightmare of growths, a horrifying, tumor giant. Ethan's gaze swept over the monstrosity, and for a brief moment, he felt a twinge of discomfort, like his latent trypophobia was about to kick in. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. He knew this was the creature's true form. The tumor giant roared, raising one massive fist and swinging it down toward Ethan with the force of an avalanche. The sheer power behind the blow was enough to crush anything in its path. This thing's got A-rank strength, Ethan analyzed calmly, his mind racing. Good thing I caught it early. If it had grown to S rank, this would have been a nightmare. As the colossal fist came crashing down, Ethan didn't hesitate. He sheathed his tachi and clenched his fist, meeting the attack head-on. Continue reading at my virtual library empire. Boom. The impact was cataclysmic. The shockwave from their clash tore through the jungle, sending trees splintering into pieces and causing the ground beneath them to crack and collapse. A wave of air pressure rippled outward, flattening everything in its path. But Ethan's physical strength was on a completely different level. The tumor giant's massive arm fractured under the force of the collision, its bones snapping like twigs. Its enormous body was sent hurtling backward, crashing into the ground with a thunderous impact. Ruah-aarr. The tumor giant howled in fury, thrashing as it tried to rise. It wasn't just angry, it was desperate. Physical combat wasn't its true strength. Its real power lay in its spores and hallucinogenic abilities. But Ethan's domain of the dead was an overwhelming counter, rendering its abilities useless. On top of that, the gap in their power levels was insurmountable. The mother organism hadn't yet matured to its full potential, and against Ethan, it didn't stand a chance. Its massive, tumor-covered body hit the ground like a sack of broken bones, struggling to move. Before it could recover, Ethan leapt high into the air, his figure a blur against the smoky backdrop of the battlefield. He came crashing down, driving his boot directly into the creature's head. Boom. The ground shook violently as the impact cratered the earth. The tumor giant's oversized head was obliterated, reduced to a pulpy mess. At the same time, a glowing crystal core shot out from the remains of its body, spinning through the air. Ethan's final blow silenced the chaos in the jungle. The smaller monsters, which had been mimicking life moments earlier, collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Their bodies shriveled and decayed rapidly, turning to ash and rot. The piercing shrieks and roars that had filled the air moments ago were gone. The only sound left was the crackling of flames, their flickering light casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. They're all dead. In the clearing, only the scruffy man and the other two remained. They had been on the brink of collapse, but Ethan's overwhelming strength had turned the tide. The mother organism had been slain in mere moments, leaving the three of them alive, barely. He's so strong. The younger man stared at Ethan in awe, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had witnessed the entire battle, every swing of Ethan's blade, every impossible feat. That horrifying, grotesque monster, taken down so effortlessly. Yeah, the scruffy man muttered, nodding weakly. His legs wobbled beneath him, and he nearly collapsed. Though the mother organism was dead, his body had already been ravaged. The fungal toxins still coursed through his system, wreaking havoc. Now that the immediate danger was gone, his body began to betray him. The adrenaline faded, and discomfort surged in its place. He felt feverish, like he was burning up, his strength completely drained. And then, an itch. A deep, maddening itch. Frowning, the scruffy man lifted his shirt to investigate. What he saw made his blood run cold. His eyes widened in horror, and he stumbled backward, landing hard on the ground. Mushrooms. Mushrooms were growing out of his stomach. They weren't the red tumors from the mother organism, those had died with it. No, this was something else. A lingering side effect of being parasitized. What the hell is this? Panic overtook him. His breath quickened, and his hands trembled as he touched the fungal growths. He wasn't free of death's grip after all. His life was still slipping away, second by second. And worse, the itching had stopped. Now, it was pain. Sharp, searing pain that spread through his body like wildfire. Desperate, his gaze turned to Ethan. If anyone could help, it was him. The scruffy man clung to that hope like a drowning man clutching at a piece of driftwood. Please, I'm begging you, help me. Ethan tilted his head, his expression unreadable as he slowly walked over. His eyes flicked to the mushrooms sprouting from the man's abdomen, and for a moment, he seemed intrigued. Huh, that's new, Ethan said, crouching slightly to get a better look. What did you do? Eat something bad? Wah. The scruffy man froze, momentarily thrown off by the absurdity of the comment. But then, after a beat, he realized it wasn't entirely wrong. I mean, yeah, I guess you could say that. Do you have a way to fix this? He asked, his voice trembling with hope. Sure, Ethan replied casually. The scruffy man's face lit up. Relief washed over him like a wave. He knew Ethan wouldn't let him down. Thank God. I knew you'd have a solution. Even the younger man, standing nearby, looked hopeful. He had the same symptoms, the same mushrooms growing on his body. If Ethan could save one of them, maybe he could save them both. But then, in the blink of an eye, Ethan's blade flashed. A streak of light cut through the air, and the scruffy man's head snapped back. Blood sprayed as his body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Done, Ethan said flatly, sheathing his blade. The younger man stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He turned slowly, staring at the scruffy man's corpse. His mouth opened, but no words came out. And then, before he could even react, another flash of steel. Ethan's blade moved with precision, and the younger man joined his companion on the ground. Ethan had helped him too. Not far away, Sam was kneeling on the ground. Mushrooms had begun to sprout from his shoulders and neck, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes were hollow, empty. He had lost the will to fight, the will to live. Ivy was gone, and with her, so was his reason to keep going. Ethan approached him slowly, his steps deliberate. Without a word, he raised his blade and, with a single motion, severed the crystal core from Sam's body. The lifeless shell toppled forward, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The truth was, all three of them had been doomed the moment they were parasitized. Even if Ethan hadn't intervened, the fungal infection would have killed them. And it wouldn't have been quick. The toxins would have eaten away at their bodies, dragging them through an agonizing death. Ethan had simply spared them the suffering. He glanced down at the three corpses, his expression as calm as ever. After a moment, he muttered under his breath. Mushroom risotto. C-135. Another surprise. After Ethan stashed the corpse, he headed back home. The crew, having just sampled a new flavor, seemed pretty satisfied. It was a nice change of pace for them. Ethan took a shower, changed into fresh clothes, and settled on the couch. He pulled out the mutated fungal crystal core and started examining it. The crystal core was milky white, radiating dense energy. But unlike the usual ones, this one had streak-like mycelium patterns running through it. At first, the fungus's abilities had been downright creepy, scaring the hell out of Big Ears. But now that Ethan had taken it down, he'd figured out what was going on. Basically, it was just a mutated shroom. Ethan thought about it for a moment. Maybe, just like with Sprout, he could try fusing the crystal core with one of his crew. If they could gain its abilities, it'd be a huge boost for the territory. With that in mind, he headed down to the street. The crew had just finished enjoying their mushroom risotto, looking pretty pleased with themselves. But as soon as they saw Ethan, they all straightened up and bowed their heads respectfully. Ethan scanned the group, his gaze locking onto a female zombie. You, come here, he said, pointing. Me. The female zombie's fierce eyes widened in surprise, almost like she couldn't believe she'd been singled out. But she quickly stepped forward, standing in front of him. This particular zombie was one of his top fighters, physically strong, highly evolved, but she hadn't yet formed a crystal core. She was a perfect candidate for the fusion. Using his domain of the dead ability, Ethan reached out and placed the milky white crystal core directly into her skull. The female zombie froze, her expression blank, as if she hadn't fully processed what was happening. But it didn't take long for the pain to hit. Her face twisted in agony, and she clutched at her hair, dropping to her knees with a loud thud. She threw her head back and let out a guttural scream. The fusion process was dangerous. It felt like her brain was being invaded, her life force flickering between strong and weak. But thanks to the X-virus injection she'd received earlier, her regenerative abilities were off the charts. After a few tense moments, she finally calmed down. A strange energy began coursing through her body, her power level skyrocketing until she hit B+ rank. It was clear the fusion had been a success. Everything was going exactly as Ethan had expected. The female zombie shook her head, looking a little dazed, as if her scalp was itching. Then, with a sudden pop, a small white button mushroom sprouted from the top of her head. All right, got a name for you now, Ethan muttered, smirking. With that taken care of, Ethan headed back home. The next few days were uneventful. The territory was calm, everything progressing steadily as planned. The sixth member of his crew, now nicknamed Shroom, had started spreading spores everywhere. These spores grew into white tumors, which, after absorbing blood, began to take on a faint reddish hue. At this stage, though, the tumors were still pretty weak. They could only morph into small creatures like rats or bugs, not exactly a game changer yet. They'd need more time to grow and develop. Meanwhile, over at Genesis Biotech, things had gone eerily quiet. Nathan hadn't moved out of Los Angeles, but he was still in talks with headquarters about their next steps. However, Over at the San Bernardino branch, Sophia was starting to lose her patience. The death of Jessica's squad still weighed heavily on her. She wasn't the type to just let something like that slide. After all, sending out an elite team only for them to die mysteriously. Yeah, no one would just shrug that off. This Los Angeles situation isn't something we can just ignore, Sophia declared, sitting in her office. Her sharp eyes glinted with determination. Her secretary, standing nearby, hesitated before speaking. But Sophia, didn't Nathan say you didn't need to get involved? Why bother with Los Angeles? I'm a stubborn person, Sophia said firmly. I don't care what anyone tells me to do or how they think I should handle things. If I decide to act, I act. That's just who I am. The secretary couldn't help but admire her boss's resolve. Sophia really is something else, she thought. She never gives up. A small part of her wondered if she'd ever be able to become someone like Sophia. But Sophia knew the truth. If a zombie king strong enough to wipe out Jessica's squad was out there, she'd underestimated him before. That was a mistake she wouldn't make again. What worried her most was the proximity. San Bernardino wasn't far from Los Angeles. If Ethan kept expanding his territory, it wouldn't be long before he encroached on her jurisdiction. Officially, her plan was to head to Los Angeles to take down the zombie king. But deep down, she knew this was about protecting her own turf. She needed to act, and fast. Send the Griff squad, Sophia instructed, her tone sharp and decisive. Take an A+ grade cyborg with them. Tell them not to go too deep into the zombie nest, just stick to the edges and wait for the right moment to strike. And this time, make sure there are no screw-ups. She emphasized the last part, her gaze narrowing. The secretary nodded in understanding. Got it, Sophia. Time flew by, and another month passed. Ethan hadn't left his house once, choosing instead to lay low and enjoy a peaceful, uneventful life. But while Ethan stayed put, his territory underwent some major changes. The sixth member of his crew, Shroom, had been busy. The tumors it had been cultivating were now fully matured and capable of mimicking human forms. As a result, groups of humans could now be seen wandering the streets of Ethan's domain in clusters of 3 or 5. This was especially true in the areas where Shroom operated. It was almost like a snapshot of life before the apocalypse, streets bustling with people, a surreal echo of the past. The sight was deeply unsettling. Anyone who didn't know better would have been terrified. The so-called forbidden zone of the zombie nest now had human-like figures roaming around, adding an eerie layer of mystery to the already ominous area. But not everyone was impressed. Bulldozer, with his massive frame and tiny, beady eyes, stood on the street, glaring at the humans with a sour expression. He could see them, but he couldn't eat them. What was the point of that? Especially late at night, when hunger gnawed at him. Shroom's creations were like a cruel joke, tempting but untouchable. Forget it. I'll just go catch some fish, Bulldozer grumbled to himself, turning toward the river. The river still flowed steadily, its waters rushing past as they always had. It was here, not long ago, that Ethan had fought the Bone Claw Zombie King in a brutal battle that had cemented his position as the ruler of Los Angeles. The fight had been fierce, but now, the scars of that clash were all but gone. The dirt had covered the remnants, the corpses had rotted away, and the rain had washed the blood into the river. Like the water itself, the memory of that battle was slowly fading into the past. As Bulldozer reached the riverbank, the sound of the rushing water filled his ears. The broken bridge that spanned the river was now completely overgrown with vines, their lush greenery draping over the structure like a natural shroud. The sight was both haunting and awe-inspiring. Sprout, I'm hungry. I want fish, Bulldozer called out, his voice booming. A moment later, a figure emerged from the nearby underbrush. It was Sprout, another zombie king, his head adorned with leaves and grass, giving him a vibrant, almost forest-like appearance. Continue your journey with my virtual library empire. No problem, Sprout replied casually, clearly used to Bulldozer's constant requests. Without hesitation, he extended his control over the vines on the bridge, commanding them to grow and stretch down into the rushing river like a swarm of serpents. The movement of the vines quickly caught the attention of the river's mutant fish. One by one, they leapt from the water, their forms varying wildly in size and shape. Some were small, others massive, but all of them shared the same unsettling features, glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. The vines sprang to life, striking like arrows. With a series of sharp thwacks, they pierced the fish clean through, then flung them onto the riverbank in a chaotic, writhing pile. Bulldozer's small eyes lit up as he watched the scene unfold. It was like a rainstorm of fish. Heh heh heh. Sprout, you're the best, he chuckled, his mood instantly improving. Reaching down with his massive hands, he grabbed one of the flopping mutant fish and shoved it into his mouth, crunching down with his powerful jaws. His sharp fangs made quick work of the bones, and the taste was, in his opinion, absolutely divine. Every now and then, he'd get lucky and find a fish with a neurocore inside, a little candy treat, as he liked to call it. Those were the best. Bulldozer was thoroughly satisfied. Life as a zombie had its perks, and surprises like this made it all the more enjoyable. But just as he was savoring his meal, something unusual caught his attention. Downstream, a sharp dorsal fin broke the surface of the water, cutting through the current with alarming speed. It was heading upstream, straight toward him, slicing through the waves like a knife. Huh, what's this now? Another surprise. C-136 I will have my revenge. Bulldozer glanced over and noticed the dorsal fin cutting through the water at an insane speed, churning up massive waves in its wake. Sprout caught sight of it too but didn't flinch. After guarding the river bridge for over a month, they'd seen their fair share of water monsters. This wasn't anything new. Without hesitation, Sprout sent dozens of vines surging toward the splashing waves. But the moment the vines hit the water, a tremendous force yanked at them. In just a few seconds, they snapped apart with a series of sharp cracks. Oh, not bad, Sprout thought to themselves, intrigued. The creature in the river, seemingly provoked, suddenly leapt out of the water, sending a cascade of spray into the air. Both Bulldozer and Sprout got a clear look at it now, and their faces showed genuine surprise. It wasn't a fish. The thing looked like a massive lizard, easily 20 feet long, its body covered in dark green scales that gleamed like armor. Its head was grotesque, with a maw full of jagged teeth, razor-sharp claws on its front limbs, and a thick, muscular tail trailing behind it. Whoa, a new flavor. Bulldozer's eyes lit up with excitement. The lizard launched itself out of the river and landed on the shore with a heavy thud. Its piercing yellow eyes glared at the two zombie kings, and it let out a shrill, ear-splitting screech. This one's mine, Bulldozer said, cracking his knuckles, clearly itching for a fight. Wait. Sprout held him back, their tone cautious. Ordinary monsters wouldn't dare challenge zombie kings. Most would instinctively avoid them, driven by sheer survival instinct. But this lizard, it was different. It had come straight for them, like it had a plan. Sprout's gaze shifted downstream, and their suspicions were confirmed. The river was churning violently, waves crashing as more dark shapes moved beneath the surface. Through the water, they could make out massive black shadows, and some of them were disturbingly humanoid. This isn't just some random monster. We've got an invasion on our hands, Sprout said grimly. As if on cue, the shadows began leaping out of the water one by one, sending sprays of water everywhere. Hideous heads emerged, snarling and snapping. And it wasn't just the lizard creatures, zombies were crawling out of the river too. But these weren't your average zombies. Their fingers and toes were webbed, like they'd evolved specifically for swimming. They looked grotesque, their faces twisted and monstrous, and they let out guttural growls as they joined the lizard monsters on the shore. The group began to close in on Bulldozer and Sprout, their numbers growing by the second. Well, they've got some nerve showing up here, Bulldozer said with a smirk. Fear wasn't even in his vocabulary. Los Angeles had been way too quiet lately. No rival factions, no real threats. It was almost boring. And being invincible, it was so lonely. But now, these invaders were just what he needed to blow off some steam. With a thunderous roar, Bulldozer charged forward, his massive frame barreling through the enemy like a runaway freight train. Bam, bam, bam. Zombies that had just crawled out of the water were sent flying as Bulldozer plowed through them. He reached one of the lizard monsters, grabbed it by the neck, and slammed it into the ground with bone-crushing force. Then, without missing a beat, he stomped down hard, crushing its skull under his boot. Another lizard lunged at him, its jaws snapping. Bulldozer swung around and landed a devastating punch, sending it sprawling. He grabbed its tail, swung it like a club, and used it to knock over several more creatures in front of him. His movements were swift, brutal, and efficient. Bulldozer was a one-man wrecking crew. But the river wasn't done yet. More monsters and zombies kept pouring out, relentless in their assault. Sprout, seeing the endless tide of enemies, unleashed a swarm of vines from their body. The vines shot out in every direction, thick and countless, piercing through the zombies and skewering the lizard monsters. The vines drained the creatures of their blood and flesh, leaving behind shriveled husks. A deafening roar suddenly echoed from behind the two zombie kings, shaking the ground beneath them. The earth trembled as an army of feral zombies surged forward, their snarls and growls filling the air. Among them were elite zombies, including Snowy, the massive zombie tiger, leaping into the fray. The invaders had no idea what they'd just walked into. The local zombie horde, led by Ethan's subordinates, was a force to be reckoned with. Within moments, the two sides clashed in a chaotic, bloody battle. But Ethan's forces were overwhelming. The invaders, whether they were aquatic zombies or lizard monsters, were no match. They were torn apart, devoured, or smashed into pieces with ruthless efficiency. The fight lasted barely 5 minutes. By the time it was over, the shore was littered with mangled corpses, and the river ran red with blood. And then, cutting through the carnage like a shadow, a figure appeared. Laura. She moved like a phantom, her razor-sharp claws slicing through the aquatic zombies with deadly precision. Wherever she went, blood sprayed and chunks of flesh flew. Bulldozer glanced back, his small, round eyes widening. Weren't you supposed to be patrolling the edge of the territory? What are you doing here? Got bored, Laura replied with a grin. Her post wasn't exactly close to this area, but the moment she caught wind of a fight breaking out, she made a point to show up. Bulldozer was speechless. He hadn't even had his fill of smashing things yet, and now she was here, stealing his thunder. Annoying. With the combined efforts of the zombie kings, the invaders were quickly wiped out. No more aqua zombies or lizard monsters crawled out of the river. The battle was over. To be fair, the enemy's numbers weren't overwhelming, about 100 or so of those lizard creatures and maybe 2,000 zombies. It felt more like a probing attack or a nuisance raid than a full-scale invasion. Where the hell did these things come from? Bulldozer scratched his head, clearly puzzled. Probably the ocean, Sprout guessed, wrinkling their nose. They reek of saltwater. Oh, that's great. Bulldozer stepped forward, grabbed one of the lizard corpses, and took a massive bite out of it, chewing noisily as blood dripped from his mouth. Laura raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. What are you doing? Boss said eating fish is good for your brain, Bulldozer replied, his mouth full of raw flesh. You're calling that a fish? Laura's face twisted in disbelief. She stared at him like he'd lost whatever few brain cells he had left. You know what? Never mind. I don't think there's any saving your brain at this point. The creatures were, in fact, from the ocean. They were a mutated species, marine iguanas. Small skirmishes like this weren't uncommon along the edges of Ethan's territory, but this time felt different. The scale of the attack was larger, and the creatures had clearly traveled a long way to get here. There was intent behind it. Ethan, sitting comfortably at home, heard about the incident not long after it happened. He swirled the wine glass in his hand, the deep red liquid catching the light as he took a slow sip. His sharp, narrow eyes glinted with thought. He wasn't surprised. In fact, he'd been expecting something like this. It was obvious where the creatures had come from, Santa Monica. The once bustling city had been mostly swallowed by the ocean, leaving behind a half-submerged wasteland. Zombies were nothing if not adaptable. They evolved to suit their environment. The ones in Santa Monica had been submerged in seawater for so long that their fingers and toes had developed webbing, making them perfectly suited for life in the water. This attack was likely the work of Santa Monica's zombie king, testing the waters, literally, for an expansion into Los Angeles. But Ethan wasn't concerned. Let them come, he murmured, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Just as Ethan suspected, Santa Monica was a drowned city, its skyline of high-rise buildings now jutting out of the ocean like the skeleton of a forgotten world. Beneath the waves, aqua zombies swarmed through the ruins, moving with the grace of fish. They darted between the submerged buildings, their movements swift and fluid. But atop one of the tallest buildings still standing above the water, a figure stood. It was a child. Or at least, it looked like one. He appeared to be around 7 or 8 years old, but his eyes were pitch black, voids of endless darkness. Tendrils of black mist coiled around him, giving him an aura of something far more sinister than his small frame suggested. This was the zombie fetus, the offspring of the pregnant zombie king. Months ago, he had been carried downriver, eventually ending up here in Santa Monica. And in just over a month, he had grown at an unnatural speed, now resembling a young boy. But despite his outward appearance, the hatred burning inside him was anything but childlike. The memory of the woman who had killed his mother was seared into his mind. Her cold, expressionless face haunted him, a constant reminder of his loss. And then there was the zombie king who had taken over his mother's territory. The rage he felt toward them both was all-consuming. I will have my revenge. C-137 zombies, of course. Behind him stood a towering figure, half human, half beast. One side of its body was covered in glowing blue scales, and a massive, razor-sharp claw extended from its arm. Its eyes glowed a menacing yellow, exuding a terrifying aura. Relax. I've already sent my men to find them. Let's see what they're really capable of, it growled, its voice like the grating of rusted metal. This was the azure-scaled zombie king. He had taken in the zombie fetus, essentially becoming its adoptive father. Not out of kindness, of course, he saw potential in the creature, a future ally who could become a powerful asset. Even without the zombie fetus, the azure-scaled zombie king had long been planning to expand his territory onto land. While he was one of the rulers of the shallows, life there wasn't exactly easy. The deep sea was home to colossal beasts far beyond his strength. Not long ago, he had witnessed a horrifying scene. Several massive tentacles, each hundreds of feet long, emerged from the pitch-black depths and devoured his underlings in one swift motion. The sight was straight out of a movie, something like Deep Rising. It was enough to make even him shudder. The zombie fetus nodded viciously, its expression twisted with malice. Especially that woman, it hissed. I want to torture her myself. Make her wish she were dead. Meanwhile, Ethan's territory had been attacked. Though, to be honest, calling it an attack was a bit of a stretch. It was more like a free delivery, some fresh seafood for his underlings to snack on. On the other side of things, Mia was busy with her own tasks. The shelter had been thriving lately. They'd managed to take over a food warehouse in the outskirts of Los Angeles, and it was stocked with a decent amount of edible supplies. Mia was in charge of guarding the place, while Chris and a group of haulers worked tirelessly to transport the goods back to their base. The operation was running like a well-oiled machine. Survivors carried sacks of grain, loading them onto carts with practiced efficiency. Everything was proceeding in an orderly fashion. Nearby, Sean and a few other awakeners stood watch, looking like supervisors overseeing the work. Their main job, though, was to ensure everyone's safety. But honestly, there wasn't much to worry about. Most of the powerful zombie kings in Los Angeles and the surrounding cities had already been taken out by Ethan. The scattered remnants of zombie forces in the area posed little to no threat, so things were relatively peaceful. Sean pulled half an apple out of his pocket, his sharp eyes studying it carefully. He'd found it at an abandoned farm. Fresh fruits and vegetables were a rare luxury in the apocalypse, so he'd been reluctant to eat it. The apple already had a bite taken out of it, and the exposed flesh had oxidized, turning brown. Sean stared at it for a long moment before finally giving in to temptation. He took a small bite, savoring the sweet and tangy flavor as it spread across his taste buds. A satisfied smile crept onto his face. Man, this is so good, he muttered. The others glanced at him but didn't say anything. Sean sighed wistfully. It's just a shame apples get smaller the more you eat them. Wouldn't it be great if they got bigger instead? Is there even such a thing? Asked Chloe, a petite girl with a bright, curious face. She was one of Ethan's builders, responsible for constructing and maintaining their shelter. Sean nodded confidently. Of course there is. Not only does it get bigger, but it gets longer too. Chloe froze, her expression turning awkward. She couldn't help but feel like there was something off about what he'd just said. Was he thinking about something inappropriate? She couldn't be sure, but it definitely sounded suspicious. Sean, you should really stop watching questionable stuff. It's messing with your head, she said, narrowing her eyes at him. What questionable stuff? Sean looked genuinely confused. Chloe pressed on. Then what were you talking about? Snake. You know, the game. Snake, Sean replied matter-of-factly. Quote. Chloe's face went blank, a wave of exasperation washing over her. The people around them couldn't hold back their laughter, some even covering their mouths to stifle the sound. Sean frowned, puzzled. What else could I have meant? What were you thinking? Ha. Oh, nothing at all, Chloe said with an awkward laugh, trying to play it off. I just misunderstood, that's all. At that moment, a chilly breeze swept through the area. The overcast sky began to drizzle, and in the distance, dark clouds loomed ominously, rolling closer. The rain showed signs of intensifying. It's raining now. Someone grumbled. This weather sucks. It's gonna slow us down again. Yeah, remember last time? When we were hauling supplies from Santa Monica. It rained so much I got stuck in the mud. Quote. The survivors began voicing their complaints, their frustration evident. Chris and a few of the haulers ran over to Mia, shielding their heads from the rain with their hands. It's raining. How about we let everyone take a break? Chris suggested, his tone hopeful. Mia shot him a cold look. Every time I ask you to move supplies, it's either windy or raining. Chris scratched his head awkwardly. Can't help it. The roads out here in the suburbs are terrible. It's hard enough for us awakeners, let alone the regular folks trying to haul all this food back to the shelter. Mia sighed, relenting. Fine. But don't waste too much time. Staying out here is never safe. With that, she turned and walked toward an old, run-down guardhouse to take shelter from the rain. Sean and the other awakeners followed closely behind her. Chris muttered under his breath, what danger could there possibly be? Still, he got to work, leading the haulers to cover the sacks of grain with waterproof tarps. Once the supplies were secured, they packed up their tools and joined the others in the guardhouse. The rain poured harder, drumming against the roof as they huddled inside. Someone lit a fire in the middle of the room, the flames crackling and casting a warm glow that pushed back the damp chill. Bodies were fragile things, too sensitive to both cold and heat. Chris crouched by the fire, warming his hands. After a moment, he pulled out an ear of corn, skewered it on a stick, and held it over the flames to roast. Brandon, sitting nearby, turned his head to look. Uncle Chris, what's that corn taste like? Chris gave him a side eye. If you want some, just say so. I'll split it with you when it's done. Hey, thanks, Uncle Chris. Brandon grinned, his face lighting up. The room was lively and warm, filled with chatter and laughter. For a moment, it felt like a small slice of normalcy in the chaos of the apocalypse. But outside, the rain only grew heavier. The sky was a dark, oppressive gray, and sheets of water poured down, creating a mist that hovered just above the ground. Man, the weather's been getting weirder and weirder since the apocalypse, Sean remarked, still holding his half-eaten apple. Mia, however, stood by the window, her large, dark eyes fixed on the storm outside. Her gaze sharpened, her body tensing. Get ready for a fight, she said suddenly, her voice low but commanding. What's going on? Chris asked, startled. The room fell silent. Everyone rushed to the window, peering out into the rain. It didn't take long for them to see it, several figures emerging from the downpour. Zombies. The rain splashed off their decaying bodies as they trudged forward, their grotesque faces twisted into bloodthirsty snarls. They were heading straight for the warehouse. Zombies. Of course, Chris muttered, his expression darkening. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The regular survivors huddled together in fear, while the awakeners grabbed their weapons and prepared to head out. The door creaked open, and one by one, the awakeners stepped into the storm. The rain was relentless, soaking them to the bone, but they didn't hesitate. Weapons drawn, they took up positions in front of the warehouse, ready to defend it. Rog. A guttural roar echoed through the rain. The zombies, spotting their prey, became frenzied. Like starving wolves, they broke into a sprint, charging toward the humans with terrifying speed. This wasn't the first time the warehouse had been attacked by zombies. It had become a regular occurrence, though no less dangerous. Chris stood at the front, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Despite the tension, he remained calm. At least there aren't too many of them this time, he said, his voice steady. C-138 The remains of an apple. At a glance, there were maybe 100, 200 zombies, nothing too threatening. But soon, people noticed something strange. These zombies weren't like the usual ones. Their fingers and toes were webbed with a thin membrane, giving them an eerie, almost aquatic appearance. What the hell are these things? Sean's sharp eyes scanned the scene, his voice calm but laced with tension. Before anyone could answer, the zombies were already closing in, now only about 100 feet away. The stench hit them first, putrid and damp, carrying a chilling moisture that clung to the air. It was suffocating, like decay mixed with the cold bite of rain. Kill them, Mia said coldly, drawing the tachi strapped to her back in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, she charged straight at the horde. Her blade gleamed, slicing through the rain with a sharp whistle, as if cutting the very air itself. It tore into the zombies effortlessly, spraying black, viscous blood everywhere. The foul liquid mixed with the rain, creating a grotesque, chaotic dance of crimson and black. Mia moved like a whirlwind, a relentless force of destruction. She was a one-woman meat grinder, cutting down the zombies with precision and fury. Behind her, the temperature plummeted even further. The already cold air turned frigid as a wave of icy energy spread outward. The Awakeners with ice-based abilities, nicknamed Builders, for their knack for shaping the battlefield, stepped forward. They raised their hands, channeling their powers. The torrential rain seemed to freeze midair, transforming into razor-sharp icicles that shot toward the zombies like a deadly hailstorm. SHHHK SHHHK SHHHK. The scene turned into a frozen tempest, shredding the zombies into pieces. Meanwhile, Chris and the others formed a tight battle formation, standing back to back with their weapons drawn. As Awakeners who had reached the neurocore stage, their strength far surpassed that of the zombies. Each swing of their blades cut down another undead, their movements efficient and practiced. This group wasn't weak by any means. Against a couple hundred zombies, they were holding their ground with ease. One by one, the zombies fell, their numbers dwindling rapidly. Victory seemed inevitable. At first glance, this looked like nothing more than a routine zombie attack. But then, something changed. Chris froze mid-swing. A faint sound reached his ears, a song, distant and haunting. It wasn't in any language he recognized. The melody was strange, shifting unpredictably between high-pitched wails and low, guttural tones. It carried an unnatural pull, like it was calling to him, beckoning him closer. His eyes glazed over, unfocused. Others began to falter too. Their movements slowed, their expressions vacant. Even as zombies lunged at them, they didn't react. One zombie, its grotesque face twisted in a permanent snarl, lunged at Chris. Its gaping maw, filled with jagged teeth, was inches from his neck. At the last second, an ice spike shot through the air, piercing the zombie's skull. Black blood splattered across Chris's face, only to be washed away by the rain. But he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, motionless. "Uncle Chris, what's wrong with you?" Chloe shouted, her voice tight with panic as she rushed toward him. It wasn't just Chris. The other Neurocore Awakeners were acting the same way. Some of them even dropped their weapons and started walking toward the zombies, as if in a trance. Chloe quickly stepped in, blocking their path. "What the hell is going on?" "It's mind control," Sean said grimly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I heard it too," he added. "That weird sound. It's like something's trying to lure us in." "What?" Chloe's face paled. The idea of such an ability sent a chill down her spine. She had heard faint traces of the sound earlier, but as someone who had reached the crystal core stage, her mental strength was far superior to those in the neurocore stage. She had managed to resist its pull. But now, it was clear, there was something else out there, something far more dangerous than the zombies. Could it be a zombie king? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Up ahead, Mia was still holding the line, cutting down zombies with ruthless efficiency. Even without Chris and the other Neurocore Awakeners, she was managing just fine. But the creature behind this mind control, that was a whole different problem. As she fought, her mind raced, trying to figure out their next move. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The mud softened unnaturally, sinking under her weight. Mia glanced down, her instincts screaming at her. From the muck, a massive, glowing blue claw shot out, its sharp talons latching onto her ankle. The claws dug deep, piercing through her flesh. Blood welled up, bright red against the eerie blue glow. It trickled down her leg, mixing with the rain and mud. Roar. From deep within the rain-soaked horizon, another guttural zombie howl tore through the air. Shadows emerged, their numbers swelling exponentially. What had been a manageable horde of a couple hundred was now a sea of over 1,000. And mixed among the zombies were new creatures, lizard-like monsters, their sinewy forms slinking through the ranks with predatory grace. "So, there is more," Mia muttered, her voice calm, almost indifferent. She had expected this. She always expected the worst. The pain in her ankle flared, sharp and searing, but it only fueled her. Her nerves lit up, her body responding instinctively, cells firing on all cylinders. Pain was just another form of adrenaline. The lizard creature beneath her had fully surfaced now, its grotesque head snapping upward, jaws lined with jagged teeth lunging for her. Mia didn't flinch. She slammed her free foot down with brutal force. Boom. The ground shook as her heel crushed the creature's skull like an overripe watermelon. Bone and flesh exploded outward, painting the mud in a sickening spray of gore. She exhaled sharply, her mind already racing ahead. The grain depot wasn't defensible anymore. There was no way they could hold this position. The only option was to break through the encirclement and lead everyone to safety. But first, she had to find the source of that mind-controlling song. Whatever was behind it had to be eliminated. Chris and the others wouldn't snap out of it until that thing was dead. Mia glanced back at her team. Unlike Ethan, who always had a squad of powerful subordinates to rely on, she had no such luxury. It was just her and her teammates, and she'd have to make it work. The horde was closing in fast. Mia gripped her blade tighter and charged back into the fray. Chloe and the others stood frozen for a moment, their faces pale as they took in the sheer number of monsters bearing down on them. Fear clawed at their hearts, but they didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Focus. Chloe barked, snapping herself and the others out of it. She raised her hands, her ice abilities flaring to life. One after another, thick walls of ice materialized, blocking the advancing zombies. But then, that eerie song crept back into her ears. The haunting melody was relentless, worming its way into her mind. Chloe clenched her jaw, her teeth grinding as she fought to stay in control. She wasn't fully under its spell, but the distraction was enough to make her powers falter. Sean, however, seemed completely unaffected. His sharp eyes remained clear, his mind untouched by the song's pull. He shook his head as if brushing off an annoying fly, the sound having no hold on him. When the horde surged forward, Sean didn't hesitate. He leapt into the fray, his fist swinging with raw, unrelenting power. Each punch sent zombies flying, their bodies crumpling like paper under his strength. He moved with reckless abandon, carving a path through the chaos to protect his teammates. But as Sean fought, the ground behind him began to shift. The mud churned unnaturally, rising and bulging until a massive lizard creature burst forth. Its hulking form towered over Sean, its scales glistening with rain and muck. Sean, behind you, Chloe screamed, her voice cutting through the storm. Sean turned, but it was too late. The creature lunged, its claws slamming into his shoulders and pinning him to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he felt the cold, slimy weight of the monster pressing down on his chest. Damn it, Sean muttered, his voice more annoyed than afraid. The stench of the creature's breath hit him like a wall, and he grimaced as its gaping maw descended toward his head. So, you like sneak attacks, huh? He growled, his tone almost mocking. With one hand, he grabbed the creature's forehead, holding its snapping jaws at bay. His other hand shot up, clamping around its throat. And then, with a guttural roar of his own, Sean twisted with all his might. Crack. The sound of snapping bone echoed through the battlefield as Sean wrenched the creature's head clean off. Black blood sprayed everywhere, drenching him in the foul-smelling liquid. He shoved the lifeless body aside and stood, his chest heaving. Sean didn't even bother wiping the blood off. He was used to this kind of mess. But as he adjusted his stance, something felt off. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against something wet and squishy. Frowning, he pulled it out. It was the remains of an apple. Or rather, what was left of the half-eaten apple he'd been saving. All that remained was the stem, surrounded by a pulpy mess. Sean stared at it, his expression blank. For a moment, he looked utterly lost, as if the world had stopped turning. C-139 You don't need to be so hard on yourself. You're all gonna die. Sean was absolutely furious. His body cracked and popped as he entered the fearless berserk state. He was already an A-rank awakener, but in this berserk mode, he was practically knocking on the door of S rank. With a sudden stomp of his foot, the ground beneath him erupted. The sheer force was like a volcanic explosion. The earth trembled, sending dirt and rainwater flying in all directions. Even the nearby zombies were blasted away, scattering like ragdolls. Sean's figure blurred, leaving behind a faint afterimage as he charged straight into the horde of monsters. His fist swung forward with the force of a meteor crashing to earth. Boom. The energy from his punch exploded outward, obliterating the surrounding zombies into nothing but chunks and dust. The ground beneath them caved in, leaving a massive crater. Rain poured down relentlessly, washing away the splattered blood, which mixed with the muddy ground to create a grotesque, otherworldly scene. But the monsters weren't done yet. Two lizard-like creatures screeched and lunged at him from the side. Give me back my apple. Sean roared, his anger flaring even hotter at the sight of the green-scaled beasts. He swung his leg in a wide arc, like a steel whip, smashing into the stomach of one of the lizard creatures. The sheer force of the kick tore it clean in half. Without missing a beat, he followed up with a brutal elbow strike, shattering the skull of the second lizard monster. Sean was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. Every movement he made was lethal, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Blood sprayed through the air, and the ground was littered with mangled corpses and severed limbs. The scene was nothing short of a hellish slaughterhouse. Thanks to Sean's rampage, the pressure on the others eased significantly. Mia caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of her eye and couldn't help but mutter to herself, "This idiot, he's really going all out today." With a flick of her wrist, her tachi blade sliced through the air, crackling with lightning. The blade flashed like a bolt of lightning splitting the sky, decapitating a cluster of zombies in one clean sweep. Mia pressed deeper into the horde, her goal clear: find the creature responsible for the mind control. If it could manipulate Chris and the others, it had to be close by. Moments later, she felt a strange psychic energy radiating from within the horde. Her sharp eyes locked onto an unusual figure among the monsters. It was a grotesque hybrid, a zombie with the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a fish. Its tail was covered in dark, razor-sharp scales that gleamed like blades. The creature's upper body was a sickly, waterlogged blue-black, like something that had been rotting at the bottom of a swamp for years. Wet, stringy hair clung to its face, obscuring its features. A siren, Mia murmured, narrowing her eyes. A zombie siren. She wasn't entirely sure what it was, but one thing was clear: the eerie, hypnotic song controlling her allies was coming from this creature. And around the zombie siren, the density of zombies and lizard monsters was at its peak. Mia didn't hesitate. She gripped her tachi tightly and charged forward. The surrounding monsters, sensing her approach, surged toward her, their feral forms threatening to overwhelm her slender frame. The zombie siren noticed the commotion and turned its head toward Mia. Through the gaps in its dripping hair, a single, lifeless fish-like eye glared at her. The haunting melody in Mia's ears suddenly shifted into a piercing shriek, a maddening, hysterical sound that stabbed directly into her mind. This wasn't just mind control anymore, it was a full-on psychic attack. Mia winced as a sharp, needle-like pain shot through her head, but her expression remained eerily calm. Her lips twitched slightly, curving into the faintest hint of a smirk. Her wristband beeped frantically, displaying her rising pain levels: 15%, 23%, 39%, 52%. She tightened her grip on her blade. The lightning coursing along its edge flared brighter, crackling with such intensity that it seemed to tear through the very air. Arcs of electricity danced wildly in the rain. Everywhere she looked, there were monsters. Mia surged forward, her speed reaching its peak. She became a streak of lightning, cutting through the horde like a storm. Wherever she passed, bodies exploded into fragments, unable to withstand her power. Slash. Her tachi swept horizontally, aiming directly for the zombie siren. The creature, which had failed to fully control even Chloe and the others, was clearly not a high-level monster. It had no time to react to Mia's attack. The blade's arc sliced through the air, cleanly severing the siren's neck. Its head flew into the air, and dark, putrid blood gushed out like a fountain. The headless body collapsed into the rain-soaked ground. With the zombie siren dead, the psychic hold on Chris and the others broke instantly. Their eyes cleared, though their faces remained dazed, as if waking from a long, disorienting dream. What just happened? You were under the mental control of a monster. Chloe explained, her tone sharp but steady. What? The group's faces turned pale with shock, fear creeping into their expressions. The realization hit hard. Monsters with such bizarre abilities were far beyond what they had imagined. Don't just stand there. Protect the survivors and get back to the shelter. Chloe barked, snapping them out of their daze. Oh, right. Got it. Chris and the others quickly sprang into action. With the mental interference gone, Chloe and the other awakeners who had condensed crystal cores regained their combat effectiveness. Their abilities flared to life, creating barriers and launching attacks to hold off the relentless waves of monsters. Under their protection, the ordinary survivors moved swiftly, retreating from the danger zone as fast as they could. Truth be told, with the strength of Mia and the others, they could have held their ground against the 1,000+ zombies. But the risk of attracting even more monsters was too great. For now, they chose to retreat to the shelter, temporarily abandoning the food depot. As the group withdrew, the torrential rain that had been pouring down began to ease, eventually fading into a light drizzle. The area around the food depot was left in utter ruin. The ground was soaked with dark, foul-smelling blood, and broken, mangled corpses were scattered everywhere. Santa Monica, a desolate wasteland submerged by the sea. Waves crashed against the ruins, occasionally tossing up bloated, decaying bodies. On the rooftop of a half-submerged building, the zombie fetus lay sprawled out, arms behind its head, legs crossed lazily. It was daydreaming about revenge, a twisted grin spreading across its grotesque face as it savored the thought. Behind it stood the azure-scaled zombie king, motionless and imposing, waiting for its minions to return with news. It had sent out 2 teams earlier and was eager to hear if they had achieved anything. Before long, the water below rippled, and an aqua zombie darted through the waves with the speed and grace of a fish. Splash! The creature burst out of the water and leapt onto the rooftop. "Boss, I'm back," it announced, shaking off the seawater. What's the situation?" the azure-scaled zombie king asked, its tone calm but curious. It felt the aqua zombie had returned a bit too quickly, barely any time had passed since the 2 teams were dispatched. What could they have accomplished in such a short time? The zombie fetus perked up, sitting upright with sudden interest. It was eager to hear the report. "Boss, the first team you sent to Los Angeles, well, they were completely wiped out," the aqua zombie said, its voice hesitant. "What?" The azure-scaled zombie king's brow furrowed in surprise. "Did they at least make it into the city?" No. They did make it to the shore, though," the aqua zombie replied honestly. Quote. The azure-scaled zombie king was speechless. Made it to the shore. It might as well have said they died the moment they stepped out of the water. "So, the zombies there must be pretty strong," it muttered, trying to make sense of the situation. "Exactly." The aqua zombie nodded vigorously. "There are several zombie kings right on the coastline, and some of them have really strange abilities. Plus, there's a horde of elite zombies with high levels of evolution." The azure-scaled zombie king fell silent, its expression darkening. It was clear now. Ruling over a city meant being strong, and Los Angeles was no exception. "And what about the team sent to attack the humans? Find your next adventure on my virtual library empire." "Well, they weren't completely wiped out," the aqua zombie said after a brief pause, choosing its words carefully. Quote. The azure-scaled zombie king immediately understood. "So, they failed too." The aqua zombie then recounted the events in detail, describing how the second team had been decimated by the humans' overwhelming strength. The azure-scaled zombie king listened quietly, its expression unreadable. The realization was sinking in. Los Angeles wasn't just home to powerful zombies, the humans there were formidable as well. The 2 teams it had painstakingly cultivated had accomplished almost nothing. Meanwhile, the zombie fetus was growing increasingly agitated. It had been fantasizing about revenge, only to hear that its forces had been crushed before they even got close. Its frustration boiled over. "The minions you've been training are useless. Absolute garbage," it snapped, unable to hold back its anger. The azure-scaled zombie king turned its piercing gaze toward the zombie fetus, its expression still calm but its eyes glinting with menace. "You don't need to be so hard on yourself," it said, its voice dripping with icy sarcasm. Quote. C-140, unofficial resident. At this moment, Ethan was still holed up at home, living quite comfortably despite the brutal apocalypse outside. With nothing better to do, he was fiddling with his phone. The shelter's food storage was attacked by a 1,000-strong horde of zombies. After a grueling battle by the Awakeners, they successfully evacuated without any casualties. Ethan's eyes immediately caught this piece of news. "The shelter got hit too, huh," he muttered to himself. Thinking it over, he quickly pieced together where the massive horde had come from. After all, in Los Angeles, aside from himself, none of the other zombie kings had the kind of influence to pull this off. The shelter's announcement was, all things considered, good news. Below the post, the comments were buzzing. "Damn, that's impressive. First time I've seen no casualties in a situation like this. Mia's really becoming a powerhouse. She's like humanity's last hope. Big cheers for Mia. Word is, Sean was the MVP this time. Took down the most zombies and even got rewarded with 2 apples by the shelter." Quote. Ethan scrolled through the comments, finding them pretty entertaining. The zombies from Santa Monica had first wandered into his territory, and now they'd gone after the shelter. Clearly, they had their sights set on Los Angeles and weren't planning to back off anytime soon. It seemed. The calm days wouldn't last much longer. A new storm was brewing. Meanwhile, over at Genesis Biotech, things had been quiet for over a month. No major developments, no big moves. But after several discussions with headquarters, Nathan finally saw a glimmer of hope. He'd been entrusted with a secret weapon. The G virus. But this wasn't a virus meant for zombies, it was for humans. And no, it wasn't designed to trigger human evolution. Instead, once injected, it would turn humans into bio-monsters. Enjoy exclusive adventures from my virtual library empire. These creatures were said to be even more ferocious than zombies, violent, bloodthirsty, and utterly uncontrollable. It was essentially humanity's forbidden drug, something to be used only as a last resort. And even then, the G virus was still in its experimental phase. The exact effects were unpredictable. Headquarters had sent it to Nathan not as a solution, but as a test. They wanted to see how effective humans injected with the G virus would be against zombies. This thing, it's a double-edged sword, Nathan mused to himself. He knew that if he wasn't careful, it could very well backfire and destroy him instead. What he needed now was the right test subjects. But within his own company, there weren't any suitable candidates. If he injected survivors or awakeners and turned them into powerful bio-monsters, there was a high chance they'd turn on him. As he mulled it over, an idea struck him. There was one group that might just fit the bill. The Black Hand Legion. The members of this group were utterly unhinged, operating without any moral boundaries. To put it bluntly, they were all psychos. And only psychos were worthy of handling something this insane. Ever since Ethan's rise to power, Genesis Biotech had been losing its grip. Nathan had already been considering a partnership with the Black Hand Legion. In the chaos of the apocalypse, the Black Hand Legion had spread like a cancer. Their members were no pushovers either, and their influence had grown to a point where they couldn't be ignored. Of course, Nathan was well aware of their lack of loyalty and feared they might stab him in the back. But when faced with an unbeatable zombie king, he was willing to take that risk. Besides, he had a bargaining chip, the human evolution serum. Profit was, after all, the ultimate glue that held alliances together. Get me in touch with the Black Hand Legion, Nathan instructed. His female assistant frowned, clearly hesitant. Mr. Nathan, are you sure about this? Yes, I've made up my mind. On the outskirts of Ethan's territory, there was a certain, unofficial resident, who had been thriving lately. Every now and then, they'd bring up one particular event, the battle by the river. Let me tell you, that battle. We were unstoppable, Big Ears boasted to a small group of nearby zombie factions, puffing out his chest. We tore through them like a hot knife through butter. They didn't even have a chance to fight back. A zombie standing nearby snorted. Yeah, right. You were probably just the lookout, weren't you? Like a glorified guard dog. What? No way. Big Ear's eyes widened in indignation, clearly offended. I'm a zombie king, okay. I don't just stand around. I was out there wrecking everything. Oh yeah, who'd you take down, then? I crushed their hope. Big Ears declared after a moment of hesitation, trying to sound as dramatic as possible. The surrounding zombies exchanged glances. It sounded impressive, but it didn't really seem like he'd done much. Undeterred, Big Ears continued, listen, the zombies in that fight weren't your average shamblers. The Bone Claw Zombie King even pulled out his full skeletal form. Dude was terrifying. But in the end, Ethan and I took him down together. Whoa, that's insane. The other zombies nodded in admiration, clearly impressed despite themselves. Big Ears basked in their praise, his ego swelling. Among the smaller factions in the area, he'd already built up quite the reputation. He was practically the unofficial boss of the freelancers around here. Tell you what, Big Ears said, puffing out his chest even more. If I get the chance, I'll introduce you guys to Boss Ethan. Maybe you can join his zombie horde too. The other zombies looked skeptical. Wasn't Big Ears just freeloading in Ethan's territory? Did Ethan even officially recognize him? But before anyone could voice their doubts, Big Ears' oversized ears twitched. He froze, tilting his head slightly. Wait. Hold up. Opportunity's knocking. Without another word, Big Ears dropped the conversation and pressed his ear to the ground. His massive ears twitched again as he picked up faint vibrations. Then, with his butt sticking up in the air, he kicked his legs and slid forward on his belly, heading toward the distant street like some kind of bizarre zombie otter. The zombies left behind stared after him, baffled. Hey, don't just leave. Tell us more about the fight. One of them called out, but Big Ears was already gone, his tail disappearing into the distance. When it came to work, Big Ears was surprisingly diligent. His massive ears could pick up sounds from up to 2 miles away, and he was always on the lookout for anything interesting. This time, he'd caught something unusual: human voices. Following the faint sounds, he moved closer and closer, the voices growing clearer with every step. Soon, he could even make out snippets of their conversation. "They're underground," Big Ears muttered to himself, quickly pinpointing their location. Sure enough, not far from where he stood, a group of humans was making their way through an underground passage. These weren't just any survivors, they were members of the Black Hand Legion, the group Nathan had reached out to. There were 5 of them in total, 3 men and 2 women. Leading the group was a wiry young man with short, spiky hair like steel needles. He had a lip piercing and carried himself with the cocky swagger of someone who thought they were invincible. "This deal with Genesis Biotech is a steal," the spiky-haired leader said with a smirk. "We're practically robbing them blind." "Yeah, the zombies in LA must be insane if they're desperate enough to work with us," another man chuckled, his tone dripping with amusement. A third member of the group nodded. "No kidding. That zombie king they're so scared of. His territory's basically a no-go zone for humans. It's like walking into your own grave." "Wait, you don't think he'll notice us, do you?" one of the girls asked nervously, her brows furrowing as she glanced around the dark tunnel. "Relax," the spiky-haired leader said dismissively. "Genesis Biotech already told us, his minions are crows. They patrol the skies. As long as we stick to the underground, we're golden. No way he'll find us." "Oh, okay." The girl still looked uneasy but nodded, reassured for the moment. The group continued walking through the pitch-black tunnel, which had once been part of the city's subway system. Now, it was long abandoned, with no zombies in sight. It was eerily quiet, but that only made it feel safer. Their voices echoed through the empty corridor, bouncing off the walls. What they didn't realize was that those sound waves were traveling upward, through the ground, straight into a pair of very large ears. Big Ears grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "Heh heh. This is my moment. Time to shine.